Hello, YouTube. It's me, Powder Mouse. Good morning. Can you hear me? Let me know if you can hear me. For you in the future, today is February 18th, a couple days after the great Valentine's Day, or Silence of the Lambs Day, however you want to look at it. Um, and I got to tell you, it is a cold, cold February morning this morning. Woke up, it is about 15 degrees outside in the great comic book room here. In case you hear the hum of the heater here, it was actually 37 degrees and, well, 37 to 45 degrees in here, depending on which, thermometer I want to go by and stuff, right? Um, so we had a little technical issue. We're starting about 6 minutes late what I had scheduled. So hopefully this microphone is working. Let's see who is here. The coffee this morning. Easy Comic Reader is here. And if Paolo, who I'm not expecting to really be in here or not here, he let me know. I sent out a few right off the bat before we really get started here. I sent out just a few random invites in case people want to pop on here. I may be doing something more like that. So if you want to be on the show, definitely let me know. Let me know how to contact you. There's enough people that's been here forever that I think some of you guys might want to pop on. But Paolo, check this out, guys. It is lunchtime over in Portugal, and they are having wine and stew, and all because it is his father's 76th birthday. So everybody wish Paolo's father a that is a milestone of a birthday. So congratulations, and so glad he gets to spend it with family. John C is here. John C is the role model. He's the one that I tell you, be like John C. Subscribe, like, hit that bell so you know when I'm going to be here and what's coming. Michael Gallant, how are you doing? Guess everybody say good morning. Easy Comic Reader. I tell you, man, that just rolls off the tongue. And as a kid, I know who Comic Reader, Easy Reader was, but Easy Comic Reader, even, if Easy Reader was, cold and cool, then we have Easy Comic Reader who is ice cold and smooth as ice. I just messed that up. My whiteness came out. Little Jimmy Fireball, good morning. Okay, guys. So I'm not going to show it today. I don't have a comic book haul. It is on its way from the Gmart comic book shop. I have been getting my comics online, most of the new ones, for 35% off for well on 23, 24 years. And a couple of months ago, they got bought out and they shut the actual physical store in Chicago down, but a bigger comic book store. But they've kept the website up and the mail service going. And I'm noticing it's just a little bit slower, yet the packaging is more consistent and better. So I really can't complain. So that'll be coming. And then I went to a flea market yesterday. Believe it or not, once again, I have been under the weather, but I got myself up, drove to Abingdon, Virginia, which is a little bit over an hour. They had an indoor yard sale that was rescheduled from last month because of the weather, the horrible, horrible blizzard of 2024 that we all survived over here, and lost internet for a few days, which I thought was actually fantastic. I liked the quiet and pulling out my physical media and actually reading. But anyway, I went there, didn't find a whole lot except for a beat up Famous Funnies comic book from 1942 that I'll be putting on Instagram later today that I got for $1. It is complete, even though it is not attached, with staples, and the actual wraparound cover is a little tattered and stuff. But, the actual comic pages and things like that are fantastic, And then I got rejuvenated last night. I got an invitation. I'm gonna have to look it up. I just blanked out on the channel. Garage Comics, I think, or something like, I believe, or something. But last night, Gore Vidal, who I hope will pop up sometime this morning, invited me to a show he was on a gentleman's channel here. I'm looking it up as I speak, and it was very cool, man. Very old school, ironically, YouTube comic book talk, right? It was fantastic. Let's see what his name is. Garage Geek. That is his name, right? I'm assuming he's fairly new. I'm not sure, but Gore had, he did a fantastic show. They started out talking about the little literature, and then they tried to spend about 30 minutes on that. Moved on to music and I think movies, and then comics, and they tried to keep it 30 minutes at a time. They knew what they want to talk about. I tried to do that last year. I don't know if you guys have been watching me for a while, but about 10 years ago, it's one of the few times I will crank my own horn there a little bit with a guy named Constant Bromstar. But we did a fantastic show on his channel. I wished he'd kept the episodes up, where we would come have a theme and we would go deep into that theme with comic books and things like that. And it was called Finally Designed. And there were people up until about a year ago. I haven't heard anybody finally not talk about it about a year ago who was still praising or wishing they could find those episodes. The greatest two we did was the post-apocalyptic show, where we went through anything and everything we had in our collections of post-apocalyptic comics and movies. And then there's the one that everybody showed up with, and a guy named Ghost Critic said that there was a mystique to it, an atmosphere, a mystique, if you will, was when we did the Neil Gaiman Sandman deep dive. It was fantastic, great times. Cannot believe that was about 10 years ago. So before we get into what we're going to talk about today, I have a situation to where every other weekend, maybe 2 times a month, I'm going to have a little bit of free time, maybe. And I don't like to put anything in cement, but this is probably going to happen. But I'm probably going to be doing an extra show, and I would like to have guests, or maybe a round table, a rotation of guests, permanent guests, whatever you want to do, to come in. So if you're interested in that, go to Howler Mouse on Instagram, message me, let me know if you'd be interested in that. I can give you more details. But like I said, I had an opportunity come up, and I would like to do something a little bit more structured. If you go back on this channel to the about a year ago, the last two Cavern of Chaos episodes that were on this channel, I sort of try to get a theme going. The Conan show was fantastic, a lot of great feedback, and we had a ton of people show up on it. So it's going to be something like that, So anyway, so as you can see behind me, to go ahead and get on this stuff, right? Would you come back behind me and stuff? I told the tragic tale many times in 2010, where I was moving out of Roanoke, Virginia, and I had to load that U-Haul up by myself, just because it was like Roanoke. If I was in my hometown, I had 2 or 3 people helping me. Over there, not so much. People will like feed you and say they will come by and let's go out to have dinner and things like that. But when it comes to actual physical labor, they seem to go, no, I don't know. I don't know at the time. Maybe I shouldn't be doing such a broad stroke there with the city of people of Roanoke and stuff, right? People have lives. So when I got to where I was moving to, which was ironically just a few months before I started this YouTube channel, I was in a situation where I'm like, okay, I'm living with somebody. I want to put these comic books up. I had a huge closet to put all these boxes I had in. And that's how this channel started, before I even knew there was a comic book community on there, because of that move. And what I would do is I put a big number 1 on a long box, and then I shot a video for box number 1 that was going to be for my reference. So if I wanted to find something, it would be listed there, and I was going to go into detail in the description box for myself. And that's how people like Captain Strangelife and Constant Bromstar, old school guys, found me. I had no idea that there was a few people on here already doing comic books, right? And then as I was doing those, I kept feeling like I was missing something. And I got on there, and I immediately knew that 1 box was missing, but I didn't realize it was 2 until a few months later. And it was so tragic, but I had 2 long boxes of comics stolen off the U-Haul that I had. They hit the jackpot, right? It was my run of the Incredible Hulk, and the other one was like my Jack Kirby Fantastics 4 and Silver Age stuff and things like that, right? So they hit the jackpot, and yes, that was a deep wound. So basically, I still had a few Incredible Hulk books scattered here and there. Like I said, they got the good stuff, right? I had a complete run of the Peter David stuff, even the Al Milgrom stuff before that, and I've sort of built some of that up and lucked up because like some were like anniversary issues, or I had some in a key box, so some stuff was salvageable, right? So that's one of the reasons I never really sat down and did a complete Hulk deep dive. So maybe the character is going to be character centric this morning while we talk, and who knows how long we're going to go because it is cold outside. and I plan on getting my day going when it's warm. So beside me here, I have one short box of Incredible Hulk stuff. Down here, I have another Incredible Hulk short box. I pulled a few trades and stuff, beat up trades and things off of the shelves. And I'm just going to talk and do memory with this stuff. And who knows where it's going to take us. This is the fun stuff, the stream of consciousness stuff, right? And by all means, throw in your comments and memories and stuff if you want me to go somewhere else with it. So you see I have the gray Hulk here. You see I have the green Hulk here. But let's go back even further than that. Hulk was just always around when I was a kid. I did not have a chance to not love the Hulk. I never realized my love of the Hulk until I realized that box was gone. You know what I mean? You take some things for granted. I'm one of those guys I took for granted that Peter David would be on the Hulk forever. You know what I mean? Like, why would you take him off? We had our magic in a long run. Back in the days where you would have a team or a writer or maybe an artist or somebody would be the standard on a book. But when I was a kid, you got to understand it was a fantastic time to be introduced into comics because comics still had that stigma and they were still like they still are to a certain extent that outsider feel to it. I learned real quick that, a lot of people would not want to talk about comics, but I didn't care because luckily enough, I had the insight and still think that they're missing out. It's not me, it's them. And I'm fine with that. And I think because I think it's true. But what was going on in the late 70s when I got into this stuff? Go down memory lane. So basically, I can remember the world pre-Star Wars and after Star Wars. And yes, there's a difference. There was like pop culture stuff wise, right? I always bragged that I saw Star Wars when it came out, and I was about 4 in the theater until I found out that theaters back then and throughout the 80s, and I don't know if they did it in the 90s, but they could get movies that were 6, 7 months older and run them. So we're going to say I saw it when I was like 5. I don't think I saw it when it debuted, right? Meanwhile, I discovered I was about 4 years old. I was able to dig through the stepdads and uncles comics. So I'm discovering comics and what is on TV at the time and what's in the theaters. Besides that, Christopher Reeve's Superman that I still love to this day. And this is where things were events. What else? And then what did we have on television? On Sundays, I would go out and ride my big wheel, and then the stepdad would walk to one of his friends' trailers in the trailer park, and they were probably smoking pot and stuff now that I think about it. But by the time I got there and would come in, this was standard, it would be a Godzilla movie and Star Trek. Okay, so I'm discovering all of this on a Sunday. It was fantastic. A year later, it would be Doctor Who. But those Saturday mornings and then primetime channels, we had things like Super Friends, Harlem Globetrotters. And then the Harlem Globetrotters became superheroes, right? The new Batman Adventures have come on, right? Reruns of George Reeves' Superman show and the Batman 66 show were in places if you were lucky. Sid and Marty Krofft with Electra Woman and Dinah Girl was actually still playing along with Wild Boy and Bigfoot. All kinds of superhero and sci-fi things. Star Wars had rejuvenated the sci-fi thing, and Super Friends and Filmation was what they were doing. And superhero things were, all over. Dynamite and Blue Falcon. It was just permeating everywhere. The comic books and stuff, right? And they were cheap, and you go to the round table. But prime time, we had Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, fighting evil in her satin tights, if you will, right? The first season is the one I love, the one that was actually in the 40s and stuff. But by the time I was old enough to realize what I was watching, along with Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon on Saturday mornings by Filmation, serialized. I have all this stuff on DVD. And have enjoyed it, and it just blows my mind that my interests have not changed that much from the late 70s and early and throughout the 80s, yet this stuff is still keeps coming back. I have lived to where I have seen Wonder Woman as a primetime TV show and The Incredible Hulk, and we made it all the way through to where they became feature films, almost validating me holding on to this stuff. Eric Breen, check your or I think it's Twitter. Check your Twitter if you have time. I've sent you an invite with a few other people. So open invitation. If you can make it, that's great. If not, no problem. Good to see you. See Woodward, if you would like an invite, let me know. And let me know where to send it. Anybody else there and stuff, right? We're shooting from the hip, talking about the Hulk and memories and stuff for people that's popped in. So in the house, as I've said, the stepdad, was able to recover some of his comics, and one of the standards that he would get would be these Marvel Treasury editions, which I don't think I pulled out. I don't think I still have it. So the Marvel Treasury editions, as you know, were huge books, and as a little kid, they were even bigger, and that's where I would see the Incredible Hulk raging with his fist in the air with Dr. Doom hovering over him like a floating head on the cover, right? And then when you would get into that Treasury edition, if it's the same one I'm thinking about, Roy Thomas had done this incredible story where he did a sci-fi version of Moby Dick. And the Hulk is on a slave ship that actually cruises on solar waves or something, and he's chained up with a lot of people, and they're all doing the oars up through space. And who is the first mate or the person over them? The Abomination. And there's an Ishmael dude with a fin on his head, and he's yellow and things like that. But then there's the real captain, who is half cyborg, because he's going after his Moby Dick, which is this great big huge electrical space monster. This is the first Incredible Hulk story that I can remember reading, and it was like taking an adaptation of Moby Dick and sticking the Hulk in it. Only in comic books can you have something so cool, and when you say out loud, it sounds so ridiculous, yet it worked, right? That was it. The first time I see is the big bad Hulk is sitting there, and he's a slave. You know what I mean? Running around. The great thing about that, about the Hulk as a character, is if you go back to the 60s, the Comics Code Authority, as you know, with comics, really targeted a lot of things that were mainly EC comics. And that's where we got a lot of ridiculous storylines of creators trying to work around that. That's where we got all those Superman stories where he would get a lion's head, or the Flash would get a huge brain, and body image stuff and ridiculous stuff sometimes, right? All fun now looking back on it, right? But one of the things in the Comic Code Authority is that you would not have the American government look like the bad guy, right? So when the Hulk came out, the Hulk was actually counterculture, and it grabbed college students, because first of all, it touched on the atomic age. This is a scientist building a weapon, of mass destruction for the government. And it's based on gamma rays. And if he had not created that, he would not have turned into the monster and got cursed with the Hulk, if you will, right? But the other thing is that if you go back and you read those books, they did get repetitive through those great years, because he was always in the desert, and it was always General Thunderbolt Ross and the army coming after him and the government coming after him. So by making the Hulk a monster instead of a proper superhero, they got around the Comics Code Authority, touched on the counterculture of the time of don't trust anybody over 30, don't trust the man, and everything else that was going on leading up to Nixon and things like that. They made the U.S. Army and the American government the bad guys, going after the what is it? What is the word I'm looking for? He's the monster he's misunderstood, after the misunderstood monster. Poor Bruce Banner. So the Hulk was like just the standard, based on Universal monsters. Jack Kirby's vision of Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde, and he started out gray. And that's the great thing about keeping continuity, that Marvel really is the one that started, and tapping into the history and of a character, and being a writer who's knowledgeable of the character he's writing, which is lacking today. Going back to, I blame Bendis. I think Bendis is the first one that was just apparent he didn't know these characters he was writing at all and stuff, right? But he started out gray, and I've heard several stories, but I think it does come down to printing. But having the Hulk gray, he was sort of getting lost on the page, so they made him green, and they kind of wrote it into the story a little bit that he was evolving. But then you had Peter David come in the 90s, and he just worked that gray Hulk in to something even bigger and better, right? So it was fantastic stuff, right? Okay, so we're going to be looking at some things, but I want to show you some of my favorite Hulk stories. So we're going to go to a Fantastic Four Epic Collection, right? This is, I had torn and tattered copies of Fantastic Four 26 and 27 in the house, right? They were horrible, right? And then I don't know where they went. And then I read Marvel's Saga in 86 or 87, and they revisited this story when they were telling the chronological history of the Marvel Universe. And this is the holy grail of Fantastic Four issues that I hope to get one day, right? But it's issue 25 and 26. Okay, so give me a second here. Stick your fingers. Here we go. So one of the great things about the Hulk is that pitting heroes against heroes, if you will, or monsters against monsters. So Fantastic Four 26 and 27. This is where the Marvel Universe had been built up for 2 years, more or less. These things were, some of these books were bi-monthly when they came out, so grain of salt and stuff, right? But all of a sudden, this was a huge deal and a huge event because you had the Fantastic Four over here. You had all these little tales of suspense and journey into mystery stories with Thor over here and the Wasp over there and the Ant-Man. And then all of a sudden, these characters started crossing over and they formed a group called the Avengers, even though it felt like none of these heroes should fit together and the Hulk was there. So a lot of people kind of forget, maybe not so much now thanks to the movies, that the Hulk was a founding member of the Avengers. So then what happens is over the next couple years, as the people get to see these characters expand and bicker and everything like that, the linchpin of them crossing over is all of a sudden the Hulk is in New York and the Fantastic Four is going after him. Wow, we get to see the Thing versus the Hulk. This is all completely new. As I'm saying this, there's probably people out there probably not getting this, but this was new. This had not really been done before so well to where this counts. And then what happens in the next issue, right when you have the Hulk versus the Thing with the Fantastic Four in New York, Jack Kirby's drawing this. Oh my God, the Avengers show up. You have to get that next issue, right? So that's what the Hulk did. The Hulk was like this pure savagery that was showing up. And isn't it great that there was a time in comics that if the Hulk showed up or Doctor Doom showed up, people were like, oh shit. You know what I mean? They were like, like, no, like, what are we going to do? So, yeah, going back to the Hulk, man, one of Jack Kirby's greatest creations, a sympathetic monster, a spoiled little kid rolling around. And he's got this thing that he's tapping into where, like, he just wants to be left alone, So, yeah, great stuff. Great tapping, great source material, great influences on the Hulk. Now, the great thing about the Hulk, though, is as we grow older, reading it from a kid and growing older, there's things we can project on that. You know what I mean? There does come a time in your life where you're like, can everybody shut the fuck up? Leave me alone. I'm going to be in my house. I'm going to be watching Survivor Man and nature programs on National Geographic. What does the Hulk do? He just wants to bounce around in the desert and maybe hit a little. He just wants to, hit a little redwoods forest there, just to watch a deer walk by. Come on, man. That's the good stuff, right? Oh man. Oh wow, look at this. We got some comments. So let's see what we have here. Comments are not moving. I had some technical stuff going on, and apparently it's still going on. Let me try it this way. Okay. John C. loved the Peter David Hulk run. One of the greatest runs in comic book history. Great to see Woodward. Everybody jump on see Woodward's channel. I think he was on like a little bit of a hiatus, and then all of a sudden I'm subscribed and got a bell. Then all of a sudden I've started getting alerts that he's been back in probably like the last week or so. I don't know, sorry Woodward, but I've got your stuff queued to sit down and really watch. Great to see you back. I'll never forget kids in school calling me a nerd for collecting comics in the 80s. Right. I've got some, that was our Vietnam, sir. Eric Breen, like I said, check your messages if you want to jump on. Great to see the Breen. John C. Space Ghost cartoons and Super Friends classics. I just read some news, I think Friday. I don't know if it's Dynamite, Boom. I don't know who it is, but we have another Space Ghost series getting ready to come out. And if it does well, or maybe they're just trying to hype it up a little bit, I think we're going to get like Johnny Quest and some more Hanna-Barbera stuff. So I have to look that up. We have Tommy T Dog here. And little Jimmy Fireball says, it blew my mind when I saw the story in a Treasury edition, the Hulk against the Fantastic Four and Avengers classic. So yeah, right off the bat, the Hulk brought excitement and stuff in there, right? And that's what he's always been able to do. But as a kid, there was a storyline that I was picking up on that I totally got. I totally got this. I totally understood what was going on. I'm not going to grab them all, but I'll give you enough just to do it. But there's an ongoing thing, and I think I have the actual issues in another box. But of all people, Harlan Ellison came on and sort of did this story, this one-shot little story with the Hulk, and Roy Thomas helped to adapt it better to comics, if you will. Love from the Heart of the Atom. So what happened is that there's these wizards, which ended up being in a microverse, if you will, decided to cast a spell to try to get this, to put it loosely and just to get to the point, because I don't want to drag out on this, is basically they were looking for like this Messiah savior to come down and save them from an evil empire. And it was a very, king's, queen's castle sort of thing with super science. You know what I mean? They were mixing some fantasy with some science there. And they got the Hulk and shrunk him down and brought him down in there. So there's no Bruce Banner. Now the Hulk is the main character. They broke the pattern of being Hulk, Banner, Banner waking up, tattered clothes. Where am I? Everybody's coming after me. What's going on? And all of a sudden they introduced Jarella. And now the Hulk, as a separate person entity, gets rounded out better, more as a character, because now he has a love interest. Peter Parker. Bruce Banner has Betty Ross, and who I'm still convinced she's just in love with him because Daddy didn't approve. I'm calling it. And then all of a sudden you come over here, and now we have Jarella, a beautiful, very calm, green-skinned blonde lady. Marsha Brady with green skin is what she reminds me of. And now the Hulk has a love interest. And this is one of the best Dave Cockrum Hulk covers I have ever seen, where he gets called back years later. And they do a whole storyline. And this was the stuff that I was just like in love with. This between Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk on television, which I can't believe I went on a Wonder Woman tangent. I guess I forgot who I was talking about. We didn't have CGI. We had Lou Ferrigno with the real muscles and the little green sandals running around. And he was so convincing to little kids that Mr. Rogers had to go over there and did a little interview to show the makeup and the wig going on, right? That's where I was going with that a minute ago, right? Shooting from the hip this one, right? But anyway, if you want to know more about Jarella, here's that great cover back on there and stuff, right? You can, of course, Google search and stuff, or you can just look up this hardback trade that I have called Hulk Heart of the Atom, where I couldn't believe this trade was out. I mean, I really had a list of comic books that I was trying to recollect and stuff to get everything Jarella ever. And they've already collected it. This has the Harlan Ellison issues. This collects Incredible Hulk 140. That's the Harlan Ellison issue. Hulk 148, 156, 202 to 203, 205 to 207. 246 to 248 in a What If number 23, right? And like I said, the Hulk, Jarella, it makes him an even more sympathetic monster. You end up rooting more for the Hulk than you do Bruce Banner as time goes by. Herb Trimpe on there. That is Jarella. And I got to tell you, man, I mean, when I was reading this, I was discovering Doctor Who and Leela a little bit after that. And I don't know, man. I mean, it was just a great time. But all these female characters kind of being savages and stuff, or being with Savage, Beauty and the Beast. The Beauty and the Beast theme is basically what was going on. Just great stuff. Jarella was the one that could talk to the Hulk, the one she could calm him down. And I'm pretty sure they did some kind of magic to where he never really turned into it. But the Hulk kept losing her. And then eventually she did die, And it was very sad, very sad. So whenever I read the Hulk, always in the back of my mind, it is he's lost Jarella. I mean, no matter what happens, no matter what version of the Green Hulk we get, the Professor Hulk, The early 80s where Hulk had Banner's mind and he couldn't hold on to it, and it was always Betty Banner and stuff like that. I'm always like, Jarella is the one he should have been with, that's what I wanted to see happen. And every now and then somebody will kind of bring her up to manipulate the Hulk or to mess with him or something, right? And that's basically what it comes down to. And I'm telling you, with Future Imperfect and the Maestro, like I said, this is all one big. I grew up reading the Hulk and keeping up with all this, right? So by the time we get to the Maestro in the future with the Future Imperfect, um, I'm kind of wondering if Drella was there, we never would have had the Maestro. You know what I mean? It never would have happened. To me, that's what really happened to the Hulk and Bruce Banner and stuff, right? At the heart of the atom, he lost his heart. So there you go. And I'm just going on a tangent here. So some of the things that I've been able to keep over the years, and you probably see me buy them or something at the flea market. I think I don't know how I got this, but I know I got this in the last 10 years. It's all beat up and I meant to do it. But if you want to find a cheap trade or something to look at all the transformations of the Hulk up to maybe 98, I think. Well, 2001 in this one, right? There's a trade out there with this great Ed McGuinness cover and stuff called Hulk Transformations, right? And this has the Incredible Hulk. Okay, Incredible Hulk number 3, Incredible Hulk number 6, Incredible Hulk 272. You guys have to remember, there's only a few issues of the Hulk that came out, and it actually got canceled, but a letter writing campaign, I believe, got it brought back, and it took over. I'm glad Breen is out here because I'm blanking out on this. It took over the series of another book, and that's why we have higher numbers all of a sudden, right? Hulk 315, 324, 347, 377, right? Writers that have touched the Hulk: Stan Lee, Bill Mantlo, John Byrne, Al Milgrom, Peter David. Out of all those names, and there's been other people, don't get me wrong. I don't see Roy Thomas listed here, but Al Milgrom, surprisingly to me, is the most underrated Hulk artist, considering that he had to pick up after John Byrne left and continue a little bit what's going on. But we get all the transformations of the Hulk. They kind of leave out the gray one in this one and go straight to the green one. Maybe they recolored it. I don't remember. But they morphed that storyline, to get a handle on the Hulk and to try to keep things from being repetitive. They'd always, every now and then, they would kind of mess with the formula, try to give him Banner's brain, make him gray, separate Banner in the Hulk and stuff, right? Sal Buscema comes in here. Just some wild stuff going on. Steve Ditko. They would have them with other monsters that could be have the same thing, like Sasquatch. He could transform into a human. And what Peter David did with the Gray Hulk, holy crap, man, turned him into Mr. Fix-It. Well, anyway, we'll skip ahead to the great story by Peter David where we go into the psyche of the Hulk, and he brings in the idea of the ego, super ego, and the id. And we find out that Peter David wrote it to where Bruce Banner was his dad assaulted him, So the Green Hulk is actually that little kid that kind of hides and wish he could lash out, and he's angry because he was beat by his dad. He just wants to be left alone. The Gray Hulk is the survivor, the manipulative one, and Bruce Banner is the one they're both there to protect, and they merged them all into Professor Hulk. I'm all over the place, right? I know, I get it. Another thing you can get to get some of those trades is this one. This is before trades were a big deal. They were very special when they did come out, and I don't even think they were called trades. But this is from 1978. As you can see, there's no cover on the back, but I could care less. But first of all, we had that iconic image of Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk. I had the Marvel Superheroes lunchbox where on the side we also had Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk. I always loved those, how they would draw the sequence of Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk, because you won't like him when he's angry. But here we go again with more of the original 60s stories there of the Hulk with the Jack Kirby years. And this just gets everything. The annuals that are out there by Steve Ditko. So it's all there. It's all there. This is the Steve Ditko annual of the Incredible Hulk that he drew. Like I said, I was able to rebuild a lot of this stuff up. But it's really cool to go back and just read some of this stuff and see how far we've come with the Hulk and the magic of it. And when you think about this being the 60s, it's no wonder this stuff just blows a lot of stuff away, even though it's a little bit soap opera. You know, and they milk a lot of the same themes and everything unintentionally. Oh, no big deal, Breen. Not a biggie. Enjoy your breakfast next week. Yeah, sure, man. I'll send you a next week if everything works out. We'll have Breen on the show. I love the TV Hulk and didn't care for the comics version. I don't know why. I'm the other way around with Deadpool. I can't stand Deadpool in the comics, but I love the movies. Go figure, you know. So no biggie. Love Herb Trimp the Hulk. Awesome. Well, no, actually, I'm the same as you. You don't like the comics version, but you like the TV. I like the movie version of Deadpool. Were you a fan of those black and white rampaging Hulks? I finally remember Hulk versus original X-Men. Um, I didn't have access to them when they came out, but I've got 3 or 4 now in a magazine box, right? Walt Simonson, some stuff in there. I think that's kind of cool. And if I remember right, those Rampaging Hulk magazines are not canon. They made it to where it was like some alien manipulation TV show. I don't know. Something's way out there and stuff, right? No, but I enjoyed it. Anything that was different, them experimenting, people trying new stuff, even if it falls flat, I enjoy it as part of comic book history, or at least I like seeing people take chances and not going so far as to rip it, as long as they respect the character. Good morning, Gore. Great to see you. I finally replied to your email this morning. Great show. I've already mentioned it that you guys did at the beginning of the show. I got around and was talking about the great show you guys did yesterday. It kind of rejuvenated me. Okay, so we're just talking about the Hulk. We're going to see what's going on now. It's very odd, right? Let me make sure of my year here, right? Because when this came out, I was blown away. Okay, 2008. Okay, so in 2008 was the last time that I feel like Marvel really had a great, we'll say, event, almost a crossover. Even though I don't think it got the recognition, even in Marvel, that I think it deserves, it was 2008 with World War Hulk, and then what, about a year later, I think we had Blackest Night at DC. Two of the last great events that actually, to me, meant something, were well orchestrated, made perfect sense. And this one was due to a guy named Greg. Oh God, Greg Pak. Like I said, guys, I'm shooting from the hip this morning. This is all stream of consciousness. I'm just grabbing what's beside me, moving on. So Greg Pak did this great thing to where there were some, the Bendis era of Marvel I'm real hard on, because they started losing characterizations. They started ignoring continuity. They had just, I think Joe Quesada did a great job becoming editor in chief and pulling them out of the brink of bankruptcy and bringing in indie creators like Mike Allred and experimenting with some books and doing some great stuff. But then things started leading up to where we got Avengers Disassembled. Is that what it was? And I was like, holy shit, what is this, right? And it was like, throw continuity, characterization, everything out, and we're just going to make this up as we go along, and we'll say that everybody's Skrulls, who's not acting like they should, or if we're forgetting continuity. And then every year they were already it led up to them advertising company-wide events, and they were already advertising for the next one before this year's had even ended. Siege may have been like the ultimate one where people were like, dear God. That's when I finally saw people being like, dear God, what is this? When you have Civil War and you have every event like Peter Parker revealing his identity, and then a year later it's like nothing ever happened. That was the thing. Things would happen, but everything would be reset within a year. That's what people forget. When I try to talk to people about that era and they really loved it and they want to defend it, I kind of back off a little bit, because I just don't need to be that confrontational about it, because I can calmly tell them later it was all undone in a year, But anyway, over here in the corner of all that stuff going on, we had they had removed the Hulk from Earth. I mean, I absolutely love this story. I loved Planet Hulk. If you watch Thor Ragnarok, they pulled from it just a touch. They also, where else was it? It's influenced something else. But anyway, Gregory Pack, I'm positive that's his name. Let me make sure. Greg Pack, yeah, Greg Pack. He had done a story to where things were set up because they introduced the concept of the Illuminati in Marvel. And I would have been fine with the really raise your suspension of disbelief that the Illuminati characters had all come together and everything that had happened in the comics and in their particular books and corners of the Marvel universe, it just didn't fit if you know your history. So you just had to let it go and go on, right? Professor X, Reed Richards, Stephen Strange, Namor, Black Bolt. If there's somebody else I'm forgetting, whatever, But people kind of popped for that, and they tricked the Hulk. They got him in a spaceship and shot his ass out into space, and they're like, "It's better this way. You're too dangerous. We've let you run around for too long." They're trying to be proactive. And what they were really doing is that they had civil war coming, and the Hulk was just too powerful. They were just getting rid of him to level the playing field, in real world, the real world stuff, right? So as he's shot out into space and he vows to return to get the Illuminati, he ends up going through like a wormhole or a black hole or something, and then all of a sudden, we're doing things like John Carter of Mars, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Carson of Venus, Conan, a little touch of Star Wars, a little bit of Roman Empire, Gladiators. All of a sudden, it's the good storytelling where you stay true to the character and you put them in a situation to see how they would react, right? So all of a sudden, we get Gladiator Hulk, Planet Hulk, the storyline, one of the greatest Hulk stories ever told, despite it being derivative if you know your fantasy and sci-fi and stuff. But like I said, the Hulk stays the Hulk through the whole thing. And we see him on a world where they're used to dealing with aliens. It's a trap. The planet is a trap so that they can catch beings and throw them in the gladiator pit, for the masses and the king and everything, right? And then all of a sudden we have Hulk, overpowered. He's a slave again, going right back to my first Hulk story that I can remember, where he's on a slave ship playing Space Moby Dick, if you will. And now all of a sudden he's a slave again, but he rises with his brood, his blood brood or whatever. He ends up forming bonds with these other aliens who are also forced to fight gladiator pits. We find out the Silver Surfer is there. Just great stuff, man. I mean, like it's Gladiator, and he rises to the top and ends up taking over everything. And he remembers his vow, and that leads to World War Hulk, where he's coming with his brood, and we're going to fuck up the Illuminati for shooting my ass off into space. And I loved it because when he is coming to Earth, he's in a spaceship. He's got all his gear on. He's got his brood flying the ship, and as he's entering Earth's atmosphere, he's standing like a hood ornament on the front of the spaceship coming down into New York. And what's one of the things he does? He takes Madison Square Garden and builds a freaking throne right there, and that's his temple, if you will. And he's messing up everybody. It is World War Hulk, a pissed off, powerful Hulk, is here. And Tony Stark was in the Illuminati also. They were right there in front of me. So yeah, he comes back, and to me, in the real world, revenge can be very petty, but when you do it in comics, it's perfect. We get to see Hulk unleashed. So much good stuff on this. I don't care that John Romita Jr. is the artist. I like John Romita Jr. I kind of grew up with him. I have no problem with it. That may have been the only thing that I heard people really complaining about. But he takes down the Illuminati one at a time, and this is a very different Hulk. But here's the problem. All of a sudden, it ends. We get a little Planet Scar going on, a little buzz going on. And next thing we know, we get Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness coming on. Oh, I think I have those somewhere. Yeah. So the next thing we know, it's like World War Hulk never happened. It was not. I don't remember it ever being referenced in any other comics besides it being this event where the Hulk just kicked everybody's ass. And the next thing we know, Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness come out with a new book called Just Hulk. And it's like nothing ever happened. We wake up, I think, with right back to where we started with the Hulk, where it calls back to where he's out in the desert and he's waking up as Bruce Banner. And we start all over. I have a ton of these, So that's what blew my mind. That was when Marvel I may have checked out. That may be where I checked out, and my knowledge goes back. Now, the great thing about the Jeff Loeb Ed McGuinness run, which I do like, is that Jeff Loeb really has fun with Marvel. He references the past. He brings in very cool concepts. He brings in characters that he loved that you haven't seen for a while. He played an idea with the Defenders. He played around with the, idea of opposites, the exact opposite bad guys, the doppelgangers, if you will. For the Defenders, we had these guys standing in. For the Silver Surfer, we had, I'm going blank. He introduced the Red Hulk and Tiger Shark for Namor. Oh my God, what is wrong with me? Anyway, a cosmic being. So yeah, Jeff Loeb kind of harkened back to the original Hulk, and then he kind of went through the 70s is what he did. I know it went somewhere, but Ed McGuinness on that book and him, it's more fun. But to me, the Hulk has peaked when it came to World War Hulk, right? So that's where we're at. Good morning. Oh, yeah, Gore. Yeah, please jump in here if you would like. I'm not really on a time limit this morning. JLS Comics is in. And Breen. Hey, I'm a fan of that era, but it should have been just that, an era. Everything good that they did, they ruined, except the Illuminati. That was moronic. Thank you, Breen. Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was just me. Thank you, Tyrax the Tamer. Yes. Tyrex the Tamer is the character that, I can tell you exactly where he came from, where he first appeared, who he's a herald of, and I'm going blank. Everybody grab your coffee. Don't be sleepy on a Sunday morning and, read and talk about comics and stuff. You can go blank, right? So, yeah, World War Hulk, one of my favorites. Future Imperfect, one of my favorites. Heart of the Atom, one of my favorites. And then when you have little cool, very cool things, if you're into it, I did not pay $4 for this. Actually, I need to rebag this, right? And then there's infamous things that happen, because I'm going to reference this with when I get to Immortal Hulk run there, if you will, right? That I'm getting through, right? But every now and then, like I said, the Hulk actually had a problem with being repetitive in the 60s and early 70s. They really had a hard time keeping things going. And with our special guest here, how are you, Gore? Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Tim. How are you?
How are you? I am drinking coffee and just talking about the Hulk. I've gone to full
Same.
screen. I'm not going to see comments. So, good morning.
Good morning, Tim. It was good seeing you yesterday. Well, at least seeing you in the chats.
Yeah, I enjoyed the
I'm glad you
show.
could make it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. For people that haven't seen the show, it was Garage Geek. Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Garage Geek. He had the format where he started off talking literature. You guys ended up talking about music, and he tried to keep it. It looks like he was trying to keep it in 30-minute segments. But when you guys started talking, when you in particular started bringing up Joy Division and reciting lyrics, and then going back to the CBGB days of Sex Pistols and of punk and going back there. That's one of the few times I really was like, I've got to get in on this. I don't regularly get that feeling. So
That's why I emailed you.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I'm ready to do a music channel now or something.
No, that's why I initially emailed you, because you're one of the few people that I do know who likes Joy Division. And you're wearing a crow shirt and your pullover there. And yeah, we all know how much Joy Division is infused in that book.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And actually, the first time I read The Crow, it was very odd because there's a sequence of events going on, but Atmosphere actually came on when I got to the second page of The Crow, and I just sort of turned my head like, that's weird. It fits so well with what I was reading. And then the more I read The Crow for the first time, I found all that stuff in there. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah. I was going to show you, Tim, do you have this? I have it here because I still have some of the stuff I had here. Although I didn't show this yesterday. Um, do you have this here?
No, I do not have that. No.
These are lyrics where Ian Curtis wrote. What is it? Some of his lyrics, the notes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It was compiled by his wife Deborah, and John Savage was a journalist of rock and roll music in England. I think he's from England, and it has most of the lyrics, not everything though. But this is some of the compositions that Ian did.
Oh, that is so.
Yeah, I recommend this. This is Faber. This is Faber and Faber publisher. I think it's a British publisher, and I found it years ago at a local shop at a used bookstore. I didn't know it existed, but I think you might like it.
I will definitely be looking that up later. I have a birthday coming up first week of March, so
Yes.
it's on Amazon. I got somebody I can kind of hint towards there. Oh my goodness. Well, do you have any Hulk memories? Apparently, I've ended up with the theme of the Incredible Hulk, and if you do, if you don't, it's fine.
The Hulk for me is like for many of us, to my generation and yours, is the TV show, and in Spanish we would call it El hombre con los ojos verdes, the man with the green eyes. I'm not sure if he was green or not. I have no idea. His eyes were green or not. But that's the way I know my family would say, if you're gonna watch this tonight, because my family only spoke Spanish, and so they would say El hombre con los ojos verdes, the man with the green eyes. And so it was the Lou Ferrigno show, just like Wonder Woman and all those wonderful shows back then. And it was before I read the comics, way before. I don't remember the first Hulk comics I read. It would have been definitely in the 80s when I encountered him, either in an individual comic or one of his appearances in the Defenders or something, right? And but over the years, I really liked the character, and certainly what Kirby and Lee tried to do, where you have this Frankenstein's monster in a way being created, but in those early issues, because they have the Omni of those early issues, he's a very dark and brooding character and very dangerous. And there's also the way Kirby would draw him, especially the way he would leer at was it Betty? The way he would leer at her. And I remember reading something many years ago that Kirby, the way he intended the Hulk was to be like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of character.
Yep.
And as you know from the Stevenson novel, Hyde is evil. He's dangerous, right? And obviously, I don't know how Kirby couldn't push this very far, and certainly Lee would never have allowed it. But I've always been curious about that, and especially the way he was drawing, the way he was looking at Betty, and it wasn't with love. It was with savage lust. It was dangerous, right, in this situation. But you were talking about that series there. I've never read that series.
Well, you've actually given me a little bit of focus because I can kind of explain a little bit about that. And from what it started out, yes, it was like monster influence. That leering to me felt like it came from your Boris Karloff Frankenstein. That was another.
And he killed that little girl.
Right. So so the looks and the leering you're talking about, Kirby was genius. That big brow and the way he would look at him, and the Hulk was a lot more. He was exactly what Peter David did. Peter David brought a situation up to where he brought the Gray Hulk back, and he sort of fixed what was forgotten about. Nobody was really talking about the Gray Hulk. Some people would be like, wasn't the Hulk gray? And that was about as far as it really went, at least in my circles. So he went back and he looked at the monster origins that you're talking about, and that's where we got Joe Fixit. And he also put that lust that was taken away that you're talking about, that leering, that Hyde was everything. Hyde, to me, when I read Jekyll and Hyde was about repression. Jekyll is very repressed. Hyde just lets it all go. That was, and that's why he looked like a monster and stuff. He was everything that we try not to be, or manner wise. I'm being very sloppy here. I'm shooting from the hip. So Peter David brought in Joe Fixit, and all of a sudden he's running around like the city of sin. I mean, he's a mob enforcer. He's got women left and right. People are gambling. It was perfect. It really jolted people when he did that. And Joe Fixit still has fans to these days. The guy that was drawing the book, Jeff Purves, really threw a lot of people off. And then all of a sudden, we don't have the Hulk in his, all of a sudden the Hulk is in three-piece suits and he's weaker. But then people started saying he was a lot more manipulative and things like that, right? He actually ended up having a steady girlfriend. And later on, Peter David had her not only marry his good friend, oh my God, why am I going blank here? His little sidekick.
The one with the green hair.
No. Bucky, not Bucky. Oh my God. Huh?
I know. I don't remember.
I want to kick myself. This is the second time I've zoned out.
Someone in the chat probably knows.
Oh my God. Well, I keep wanting to say Bucky Barnes, and it is not Bucky Barnes.
No, it's not Bucky Barnes.
Hold on. I can solve this real quick.
Someone said Rick Jones.
Good God. Yeah, Rick Jones. I should just turn in my comic book card now for forgetting Rick Jones's name, right? But he had it to where Joe Fixit kind of disappeared because he went back to being like the Green Hulk or something. Yeah. So the payoff is if you follow Peter David's run a couple years later, Rick Jones is getting married, and it's to Joe Fixit's ex-girlfriend. And on Bachelor night at the bachelor party they were having, they put in a stag film, and there's Rick Jones's bride-to-be in the stag film.
Oh, wow.
Right. So Peter David had a lot of stuff where he started recalling back to eras that he wrote, things like that.
Interesting that was in there. Was this in the early 90s? Because I wasn't reading many comics back then. Yeah. And I've not read the Peter David run. But this was in the 90s, Tim?
See, let me think. It should have been the 90s going into the 2000s. Do
you remember any readers were upset by the stag film?
No. Nobody was, because Peter David had been on the book for so long.
Yes.
That you're getting the payoff. Here we go. Yeah. So here's where they're watching the stag film.
I see. Okay.
Right. That's what was so funny about it. And then I always buy issues of the actual wedding. What was funny is that Rick Jones had a stalker, and somebody gets stabbed by the stalker. Rick Jones had a lot of drama going on and a lot of subplots that were going on, but he would tie a bow on it very quick and move on to another era and storyline of the Hulk. Peter David kept this book going. I mean, this was a fantastic sequential month-to-month book that he kept from getting stale. That's what was so wild. Now, this book here, the reason I have so many of this one, The Incredible Hulk 418.
Yes.
It's not so much because it's the, it's not because Rick Jones gets married. It's because there is a Neil Gaiman character of the Endless in this. Now, it ended up being his bride that was actually stabbed, and she came back to life when she should have died. She I don't know if she actually died, but it was real close. Like, she shouldn't have been able to make it. And if I remember right, you were like, how did she survive? You almost thought you had a little MacGuffin there. Like, oh, come on. You know what I'm saying? So they're at the reception after the wedding, and you see this character.
That's interesting. How did that happen?
Well, they always see her from the back.
Yeah.
And then you never see her face.
Okay.
And she gives her a gift, and her wedding gift is a brush. So what Peter David is that he's gave a wink and a nod to the very popular book of the time.
Yes.
The Sandman, saying that Marlowe, her name's coming back to me now, Marlowe had a brush with death.
That's good. That's pretty good. I like that.
Little things like that is what kept the Hulk and the Peter David run going. I mean, I'm skipping around all over the place.
That's just an insight. I did not know that about that had been in there. And I would get it. It's pretty good.
Yeah. That's what I'm getting at. A lot of people don't realize that in the Marvel universe, there's a lot of DC characters that exist in that world, which blows my mind. There's a Clark Kent and a Lois Lane in the Marvel universe. You have a Nighthawk is really Batman from another world. You have a character named Speed Demon who's probably dead, who is actually a Flash from another world. And then if you read Quasar, Barry Allen is alive and well in the Marvel universe. He just can't remember his name. He keeps thinking buried alien. That's the only two words that comes to his mind when he tries to think of his past. They brush with death.
Yeah, I do like that. That's pretty good.
And then Eric Breen, the Bachelor Party issue may be the single greatest issue of the Hulk, and it was in 1993. Yeah.
Okay. Early 90s.
Yeah.
Early 90s.
So it just amazes me how you have an iconic character like the Hulk.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an archetype. In my mind, they got real repetitive with him during the Roy Thomas, Herb Trimpe years. Every now and then somebody would like come up with an original concept. They kept getting stuck with them. In the early 80s, he was floundering. They put Bruce Banner's mind. I fell out. I was out by then, but I was also like in second and third grade, which is my excuse. But they put Bruce Banner's mind finally back in the Hulk. I can't even tell you what that was about. And then they had a mindless Hulk where Bruce Banner escaped, and for some reason they threw him in between worlds that only Doctor Strange can access. They threw in
those were the Mantlo stories, right?
Right.
Yeah, I read a handful of those.
Yeah, Bill Mantlo came in. Mike Mignola.
I like those. I do like those. They're wonderfully strange, especially his love affair with that girl from another world who dies. Right? You've talked about that book before.
Jarella. I don't know if that's where they killed Jarella off or not. I am currently. Hold on here.
They have one of the trades and have varied singles from that era. Yes, I think that's it.
I'm currently I'm picking these up as I find them, and when I have a good chunk of the in between Savage Hulk books, I'll read them. Especially since they have Mike Mignola art in them. But the Hulk came back to me during Secret Wars, especially issue number 4, which just has that iconic cover now, I guess, where they've had a mountain dropped on all the heroes, and on the cover is this little line where all the heroes are laying there, and it's the Hulk holding up a mountain. Right.
Yeah, I remember that.
That brought me back around to the Hulk to see what was going on, and they were slowly turning him back into our Savage Hulk during that's what they were doing. And of course, Byrne took over, and then I was back in. So they did a lot of great stuff during that time when Byrne got there. Byrne gave you everything you wanted to see. He's fighting all the heroes. There's the Hulk Busters because the Ghostbusters were big, led by Bruce Banner going after the monster, Yeah,
I'm looking forward to the because at my shop every once in a while people come in and they sell the local comic shop. They sell their collections, and I'm friends with the owners, and they. At one point, I know the Omnis are going to come in for the Peter David run because it was so long, right? Or they're going to have probably a huge long box of the whole run. But that sometimes happens with my shop. And since they sell stuff to move, and I may get it that way. So I'm looking for, because I see them in chunks here and there, but I just don't buy them because I just want to wait. Because eventually you end up spending more money down the road. And but I'm looking forward to reading them. And I know I like the artwork and many of those things. I don't remember who did the artwork for many of the David run, but going through them, it's very nice. Right. And yes, I've heard just wonderful things about the David run, nothing negative. And so I'm sure I would definitely like it. But certainly the Hulk is certainly like that id factor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I caught some of you talking about, for example, Harlan Ellison earlier. And if anybody understood the id was Harlan, and Harlan had something to do with that Jor-El character, correct?
Yes, and he created her. Yeah,
and I have these here. I mean, you probably seen these, right? These old paperback from the 60s, 70s.
Oh wow!
I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I've not seen that one. No, the image looks familiar, but I did not see it on a comic. So
I mean, this one is how I imagine that story. Right, I have no mouth and I must scream. A horrific story.
Right,
and then you have this one here, the beast that shouted love at the heart of the world.
Right, And that's how they came up with some of the titles for Harlan issues and stuff. They did a lot. The comic book writers were fans of Harlan. I have no mouth and I must scream. I do have a comic book adaptation that John Byrne drew somewhere. I think IDW did it or something.
I know Warren Magazine had done some of them. I think for some of his Harlan stuff.
Yeah,
and with the Joy Division connection, and Ian Curtis was known to go to the bookstores, and they interviewed some booksellers after he passed away, and they said whenever he would go in, he would be looking for stuff like this. This is when these paperbacks were quite common there in England in the 70s, like they were here, right?
Great.
And they mentioned Harlan Ellison. They mentioned Michael Moorcock's New Worlds. They mentioned he would buy these, and of course they mentioned. Well, of course he talked about The Man Who Fell to Earth, right? The film from '75. And
right.
Bowie's influence is just, we all know this. It saturates that generation. And most importantly, they do mention this book here. I think you had mentioned it in your thing, The Famous Dangerous Visions.
Yeah,
this is a more recent edition, right?
Yeah. I fell down when I found it, and I'm pretty sure it was a Goodwill. I got it for $1, hardback, and not a first printing.
Oh wow, pretty good though.
Yeah, and I've gotten through 2 or 3 of the stories. I'm trying to sit down when I can really focus to read that, because it's got that reputation. For people that don't know, that Dark Visions, that was sort of a renaissance of the new up and coming sci-fi writers in '67, I think. And this is where Philip K. Dick and who else is in that?
It was Ballard, it was Ellison, it was Silverberg, it was Sturgeon.
Yeah.
What the issue was, and Michael Moorcock edited it. Well, not edited. Well, this is Harlan Ellison's collection, but it combines with New Worlds, because what was happening was it was either Ellison or Ballard who wrote about this. Is that they were writing stories, right? That they would send them off to science fiction magazines. Science fiction magazines would reject them and say, this is not science fiction. Because what do you mean it's not science fiction? Well, there's no spaceships. There's no aliens. There's no time, traveling back in time type of thing. And so it's not science fiction. Okay, so they would send it off to the literary magazines. Let me phrase that. Well, the just the regular magazines, right? Magazines would say, I'm sorry, we don't publish science fiction. And they're like, so they had no place to go. And that's when Michael Moorcock started his little magazine here. And because they began to go into, because there was that outer scape of science fiction, but now we're getting into the inner scape, the psychological factors, right? And that's what Ballard's really known for with his stories, and Ellison. And so the tie with Ian Curtis, I mean, it explains a lot, because these are the stories that he was reading. And he also liked William Burroughs a lot. But of course, Burroughs' stories also deal with this to some degree, but they're way out there. But they certainly help explain more of his stories in a way. I mean, how his mind was working creatively.
Right.
And even though his own personal issues, which were quite, pretty bad, his epilepsy, so from deep depression and such.
Yeah.
But
so let me update everybody. Ian Curtis that we're referencing here, it was in a band called Joy Division.
Right. Joy Division.
Yeah. Joy Division. Ian Curtis ended up passing away, and the man he was celebrated when he was alive, but he's really more celebrated after his passing. And the band morphed from Joy Division, and they turned into New Order, but the influence was there. And he has contemporaries that were fans of his, and this is all taking place in England. I was 6 or 7 years old when this was going on, so of course around between 85 and 87 is where I started discovering this stuff and was trying to piece together what happened. So the influence of Ian Curtis, not only in music, permeated into people like James O'Barr, who did The Crow. Anybody who was into the alternative scene in the 80s. These guys, I don't know. It's almost like you could say they, on some low level, they were like the Beatles, because Joy Division not only influenced music, it influenced anybody that was listening to them. and it did influence comics, science, some writers. They would listen to Ian Curtis. He had these really personal lyrics of things that were really going on in his relationships with his relationship with his girlfriend,
Yeah.
and basically people were deciphering what was going on. And it's just great stuff. 2 albums, and then we went into
Yeah.
New Order. And over time, I've ended up being more of a New Order fan than a Joy Division fan. But man, you put on Joy Division, it's only because if I'm in a good mood, Joy Division does have a thing where you will get very melancholy. That's why I think it influenced the mood of the Crow. Yeah, to me, I feel like giving people a warning, like, what's going on with you today? Everything all right with you and your girl? Everything good at work? I'm like, I feel like it should have a little bit of a warning, because if you listen to Atmosphere, you're going to be mesmerized. But like I said, you're going to have this uncomfortable feeling of melancholy that you need to be prepared for, in my opinion. Very
Yes.
powerful stuff. It's very powerful stuff. And I'll say this last part, that I'll show up, but I kind of compare it to a certain extent to the Ramones. The first time you listen to the Ramones, all the songs do sound the same. And then all of a sudden, the second time around, you start picking up the little harmonies, and you can tell the difference. You start getting, you hear the music. You realize this is a 3-minute song played in a minute and a half. By the time you get to the third time that you're listening to it, your brain has actually physically readjusted chemically to where you are understanding what is going on. To me, it will change your state of mind and the way you think and see things. That's what Joy Division does for me. The more you listen to the music, the more you hear.
I like that. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And especially yesterday discussing it with David, or Garage Geek, and because he said that it all sounds the same to him. But I think if you approach it the way you did, you see that it's not.
That's the very moment I caught myself typing a lot, and I just took it away. I'm like, no, don't do this. Let them talk. Yeah.
Yes, but certainly the inner stream of the of the thinking, right?
Right.
And then of course just the back of the band itself is so good. And like I think I mentioned yesterday, and when I had, because the Closer album was the first album I listened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I already knew New Order, but I didn't know it was the same band.
Right.
It wasn't until I got the album and I couldn't believe it. But we listening, because even the New Order lyrics from early on, I think Bernard Summer and Peter Hook wrote most of those lyrics. Then that one by Ian. Maybe one or two. I think they took some of the music that he had done before he died. But song like Blue Monday, when your heart is cold, it's something you don't associate with a dance song, right? And your Silent Face. Silent Face is a wonderful song, and that album Power Lies in Corruption, where Blue Monday is. It's how it's almost like it begins with this wonderful synthesizer, like you're in a church,
right?
And then he begins to narrate, and it sounds like a beautiful thing. Finally, but at the end it says, "Why don't you just piss off?" So all the punk stuff is still in there, but you're at the club with this music and you're thinking, wait a minute, what did he just say? So in that sense, yes, for me, I'm equal with both. When I listen to New Order, I'm New Order. Then I go to Joy Division, but they're just part of the whole. And at the center, one physically is Curtis, but the other one spiritually
is
Curtis.
And that's what's great about New Order. Curtis is there amongst them, even when it's just like a part of life for them. They don't come out and be like, hey, this is for Ian, or they get crowd. They don't get the crowd coming. It's like sort of like we started this with Curtis. This is where we are now. Yes. He's always there. You talked about Blue Monday. I think that is the song for anybody who, even if they don't listen to New Order, that's, in my opinion, their most popular song.
Yeah, it is.
And there's so much in that song. Again, the more you listen to it, there's little things about the song where they come in and they start out with that drum beat, if that's what it is, pom, 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 pom. And then all of a sudden they'll start telling the story about somebody's treating them bad. Mm-hmm. And they get this rhythm going, but then they do something really smart that kind of leaves you hanging, just like the person. There's a ship on the harbor and he's just telling the story. And then all of a sudden he goes, now I stand here waiting and you feel like he's supposed to be finishing the lyric, and there's nothing.
Yeah,
It's like
very
he
good. Yeah.
stops singing, and you're hanging there with him. They will get you to experience what they're feeling that way.
Yeah.
Am I wrong here, or if I listen to
No,
the
not
song
at
too
all,
much?
Ken.
Right.
What I like about this, one thing about it, I think it's a very American thing in the sense that Americans, we seem, I'm not part of that group, but Americans say we want closure.
Mhm.
Whoever came up with that horrible word, we want closure in a story. We want closure in a thing. We want whatever. I think for some who don't like Joy Division, leaving aside the melancholic part, is exactly your point right there. What? That's where it ends? Yeah, that's where it ends. That's it. It's done.
Right.
And you just leave it right there. You just linger with that. You just go with that. Yeah, but what happens? No, 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 no. You're missing the point here. Well, I don't like that kind of stuff. Well, then in that case, it's not going to work for you. But no, I like how you put it. That's excellent. Yes.
Oh, thank you. All right. I'm gonna have to retitle this. The first that's going to be Hulk to Joy Division to New Order.
Yeah, I didn't mean to throw you off, but I wanted to get on because I know
No.
you and I, you're one of the few people that I know who likes Joy Division. And I happen to have these books here with me, the Harlan and that group, but they all tie in. They all tie in to that one.
Well, I played around with the idea of doing music history or things like that. I have one video, Devo and Neil Young, and that video actually does very well. But then I found other channels that do it so much better. And I don't find a lot of people I can bounce this stuff off of. And when I saw you talking about the music yesterday, that's why this is on the tip of my head. I'm like, let's go, let's do this. Do you mind talking about another song or two if I bring it up to see?
No, not at all. Whatever you want is fine.
All right. So New Order has a song called Temptation, and I'm pretty sure, and all this happened in Britain. I found about all this stuff later on. I was not there at the groundwork, so I'm always very humble. Like, this is how I understand it, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But they came out with this song called Temptation, and just to overshare, this is what I listen to in the shower a lot. I'm like, Temptation starts out, it was their first song. It was an EP, just an album on itself. I don't even know if it's like on an album, unless it's one of their greatest hits later on or something, right?
I know it's in the 87 one that has their.
Yeah. But
yeah.
Well, what it does is that it starts out, oh, you have green eyes. Oh, you have blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, you have gray eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was so weird is that the few times that I had a babysitter when I was a kid, and it was usually because I was sick or something, I would have these teenagers over, right? And actually I'm still friends with one of them. So we go back to like 1980. I would have this one 16, 17-year-old girl, and she would always fall asleep. So I'm babysitting her, 7 years old. And I didn't have a babysitter when I was 5. I'm from that generation, lock and key kid. I had to be sick or something was going on before I had a babysitter, right? So this girl would always pass out, sleep all day. And then if she was up, she'd always have like one or two creepy guys coming around. No shirt, feathered hair on the side. They might have a roach clip on a feather in their hair. I'm not joking. And they would just kind of like creep right up into my yard, and they'd be talking to her. They'd have their hands up like this, leaning up on her on the swing set, talking to her. And that was their flirt. Oh, what color are your eyes? Oh, they said the words, oh, you have blue eyes. Oh, you have green eyes. Are they gray? So when I first heard the Temptation song, I was like, are you kidding me? So I feel like a lot of their stuff, even though it's electronic soul, to me, electronic music really sounded soulless. But New Order got around that because, to me, and I think they got it from Ian, they carried it over, it's a diary of things that are going on that may have just been a moment for them, but it's also a moment for everybody else.
No,
that was a part from the early 80s, and they wrote a whole song about it.
I think their influences for Joy Division is, I know they had been listening to Kraftwerk, right? The German band Kraftwerk. But it was generally rock and roll from that era. I know they liked Lou Reed.
Right.
I know they liked Iggy Pop. And like I mentioned in yesterday's stream, is the reason they formed the band is they went to see the Sex Pistols.
Right.
And it's something I had never thought about before. And in the sense, the way they saw things, but it makes sense to me, is up until that time, they were thinking about Led Zeppelin, but that was so intimidating because, first of all, none of us can sing like Robert Plant.
Right.
None of us can play the guitar like Jimmy Page. None of us can play the drums or the bass like anybody else there. So in other words, I'm not going to be a musician. This came from Peter Hook, if I remember seeing in I have a book, I have his biography, his memoir that he wrote. But then one night we went to see the Sex Pistols. And first, the music, they were really very jarring music, but they really liked it. But they're watching Sid Vicious. He can't play.
Right.
Johnny Rotten is just ranting. And now they're thinking, we can do this. And I had never seen it that way, that one would basically be so intimidating that you don't take that leap of faith.
Yeah.
Until you actually see someone who you think, I can actually do that.
Yeah.
And then they went and they started to do it. Of course, they needed a singer, and they asked Ian. But the history was rather brief, because I think they saw the Sex Pistols in 76, I think. And the first album came out, 78, 79. And by 1980, in May, Ian was dead.
They were gone.
Ian was dead, yeah.
That story you told about how they went to saw the Sex Pistols and knew they could do it and stuff, it blew my mind, because it was history repeating itself. Right? Because basically what you just said applied to the Ramones. Okay. To me, you have a lot of people try to figure out where punk started. And it's almost impossible, because, you had Iggy, you had the Who. There's a lot of influences. Iggy, I'll go somewhere. I'll try not to go too long here. But basically, Iggy is most proud of the fact that he helped put the nail on the 60s in the hippie movement and stuff, right? And then you had guys like the Ramones, Johnny and all of them, before they were Ramones, if you will, who had gone to see the Rolling Stones. And Johnny Ramone was in high school, and he went to see he was into the Rolling Stones, but he went to see the Beatles in New York in some big stadium. And if you look at the footage, you can actually see rocks bouncing off the stage. He liked the Rolling Stones, so he was throwing rocks at the Beatles. And you can actually see them bouncing off. So the punk movement was always an attitude more than it was music. Okay. To me, it's when the Sex, because so what happened is that these guys, what you said, could not play. So they ended up inventing a sound, downstrokes, 3 chords, power chords and stuff. Just simple, whatever you could do. They were never going to be prog rock. They were never going to be what was playing off the radio at the time. Yet these guys sitting around Queens and New York and stuff were hearing about each other because they all listened to the weird music like Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Mm-hmm. So they ended up playing July 4th, 1977. The Ramones made it, and they go to England because everybody's hating them in America, and they feel like they should be taken off, like the Bay City Rollers were, So anyway, they go to July 4th, 1977 in England. And this is supposedly the very show where they were in their green room or whatever it was in the stadium. There's some guys yelling at them, and it's members of people who will become the Clash and they will become the Sex Pistols. They formed a human chain and brought them in, and that's where everybody started getting focus, and that's where we got the Clash and the Sex Pistols proper. They were already forming bands. So now you're telling the story of how these other bands, post-punk is basically what they became, are seeing the Sex Pistols, and they're telling the exact same story that the Sex Pistols went through with the Ramones.
I did know the Ramones
amazing. Story. I find that amazing. It's a linear trail of the history of this music.
But I think, and I think artistically, I wonder how that really, because it has to make sense. I mean, if you're an artist, if you're a writer, you're a poet, you're a musician.
Yeah.
I wonder how many people just didn't cross that threshold because they were intimidated by something. I mean, if you see a Dali painting, and you're thinking, I can't do that. So, but let's say you would have been the next Picasso or the next Pollock or the next Francis Bacon or whatever, right? Or Georgia O'Keeffe. But then you says, but do you see this is the standard, and I can't do that. And I think discussing yesterday with David how he didn't like Frank Miller's artwork because he thought it was ugly, but I think what he meant was that even though he could maybe draw like Neil Adams, right? He couldn't draw like John Byrne. He couldn't draw like the realistic figures and such. And but that's really the point with someone like Miller, in the sense that they can do something original. They borrow from other people, like all artists do, right? But he was able to do something with it, and also he was a writer, and that also helped in his creativity and in his drawings and such. And you're a Watchmen guy, and I mean what Dave Gibbons did with Watchmen, for example. and so many others. But it's just I never really had thought about it that way as something maybe in the back of my head. But it wasn't until Hook said that how many people just never just kept it within themselves, the artistry, that they were so intimidated by a writer or something, or whatever, and they just didn't go and do it.
Well, there's a lot of things with that. I completely agree. You don't have the support. There's a belief by yourself. Have you been beaten down? Have you had a support system in your life? I mean, I'm a social worker, so I know there's psychological and life factors.
Yeah.
That's why, I got two things here, but one of the things that gets me is that after running with an art crowd in the early '90s, I joke about it, but I dove into it. I made $178 trying to be an artist after several months, where I'm living, Matt. What I'm trying to get at is that there's two things. When you're an artist, writer, or whatever, to me, there's a sort of a purity thing that it doesn't matter if you're going to be successful or not. If you don't get what's inside of you out creatively, it ends up eating you up inwards, and that's where your depression and stuff comes from.
That
If
makes
you're a
sense.
true writer,
Mhm.
and I hate using the word true, but I'm just bottom lining to get through this my point. But when you really have that in you, if you don't get it out or figure out what's trying to get out, you're going to go through a depression. It actually starts destroying you, and the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. The other thing is after meeting successful artists, in 1991. I took a community college trip to the Smithsonian and got to see the Monet pictures, sunset and all that
Mhm.
stuff. And I actually met some professional artists that were there, and they were telling us, "Don't do it, don't be an artist." And their wives were like, "No, no, don't listen to him," and all this stuff, right? And then I go to comic book conventions. For years, I've said it before, I didn't really meet the artist. I stuck my nose in the comic books, and but eventually in 2000, I meet people like Neil Adams, and I meet some of these people and stuff, and a lot of them are very nice, but there is definitely an ego that some of these guys have that makes them able to believe in themselves, if you get what I'm saying. Almost to a certain extent, they believe their own hype. After hearing stories about John Byrne, like I said, the people that I've met, there's definitely an ego part of it, that what you're saying about some people couldn't make it, they were intimidated, or they had to see other people could do what you're saying. Um, like I said, there's also other factors to make it that come internally, and what is very abrasive, socially awkward, could be seen as, they make the joke about a fine line between crazy and being an artist and stuff.
Yeah.
There's definitely an ego about it that you have to have, that comes from you have to be your biggest cheerleader, I think.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a very broad topic. I think that is not only broad, but it also is deep about how do you do it? Do you have to do it? Can you be your own cheerleader? Do you need some, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's a very, very good question you brought up.
Well, thinking about the this book here, because to your point, this is the collected stories of Franz Kafka, right?
Right.
Known from the Metamorphoses, and came up yesterday because Colony is one of the Joy Division songs, and I think people think I think his wife thought another study came from a Kafka story called The Penal Colony. So I reread it this morning. You probably know this, but in case I'll just discuss it. Is that Kafka's most of his stories were never published during his lifetime. He did insurance. I think he was trained in the law, but I think he did insurance. But he would write these stories, and he would read them out to his friends. And he would like when they have little socials, he would just read out the stories to them, and they thought they were rather funny. Yeah, and because when you read his stories, you don't think they're funny, but I think that was the reaction he wanted. He suffered from depression, and he died rather young, I think, from TB,
Yep.
tuberculosis. Right,
Yep.
I think he was in his 40s, early 40s. But before he died, though, he made it very clear he wanted all his stories burned, all his manuscripts destroyed. He made that very clear. And this one is by his friend was Max Broad, I think. I should know, but I should know this, but I forgot. Anyway, he told his friend, "I want this to be done." His friend refused. And it's because of his friend's refusal, we have all these metamorphoses and all these stories. Um, and rereading the Penal Colony this morning, it's a very grim book. I mean, it's a great story. It's about a traveler. He's in some island, and they have a torture mechanism there. He's there to witness the execution, actually, of a man, where basically is he disobeyed orders. The orders were that he had to sleep by his commander's door, and every hour he must stand up and salute the door. Salute the door, and regardless of the man, of the commander, because he was there whatever the commander needed him to do, but every hour. Obviously, the man can't sleep, but one day he does. He just can't. He falls asleep, and the commander wants to test him. He opens the door and he's asleep. So now he is going to be put through the ringer, and you have this machine where you have the top, you have the bottom, and you lay the person flat on cotton, and you put something in his mouth. And then what's going to happen, the top is filled with needles. Mm-hmm. And what it's going to do, it's going to write very slowly with the needles the crime that you committed. And his crime that he committed, he disobeyed orders. And his disobedience and disloyalty. And the way it is, then after a while, it flips you. And this goes on. And normally it takes 12 hours for it to kill you. And the visitor is getting the commander is telling him how this works, right? It's a harrowing story, and the man's guilt doesn't matter, because even they say the guilt doesn't matter. There's no trial. There's nothing. And Kafka wrote this in 1914, which is the eve of the Great War, right? And this is before the Russian Revolution by 3 years. And this is before, Hitler was a young man at this time. Well, Hitler was at the front, fighting, but to join the military on the Austria German side. And I know in the past, Kafka has been written about that he basically saw the future in the sense that of his stories, the insight as to what was going to happen under totalitarian regimes, where you're just taken, not even told what your crime is. You have no trial because there's no point in it, because you're just going to lie. The story says that the traveler says, "Why don't you have a trial?" There's no point in it. They're going to lie. They're going to say they didn't do it. It doesn't matter. It's just a waste of time. And we have this elaborate way of basically of executing the person, and it's a remarkable story. And again, one of the things that he wanted all these things destroyed. I remember the motivations why Kafka wanted them destroyed, but nevertheless, a very important figure, and I can see why for the 20th century. I know he's had a huge influence on many writers and thinkers. I always see him referenced by writers that I like. And obviously another one was Ian Curtis.
Yeah. You probably brought up the one Kafka story that I recall. All right. And I'm going to tell you it's because we had a discussion about it in a literature class I had in 2001 or something.
Oh, wow. I'm curious. How'd this happen? This is interesting.
I'm just going to night school, getting a degree and everything, back, anyway.
What was the reaction? I can imagine the reaction in the class. It'd been really cool to have read it in the classroom. I'm sorry.
Well, the professor, we also, I had the same professor, we call him professor, who had the creative, we had creative writing class with the same dude, same guy. And he was down from New York. Almost had a Boston accent, but he says from New York. So, whatever. And when I would speak with this accent and yet be talking about these things like we are now, you could just see he thought Andy Griffith was talking about Shakespeare in his stand-up. You know what I mean? Like, it really took him back. And he actually gave me a B in the class when I would get up to talk about some of my writings that I was doing, because I didn't end my words with the letter G because of my accent. He docked me a grade because of my accent, basically. you know.
Okay.
But anyway, he brought that up. The class brought it, and the class is all in there, and they're just like, "Whoa, that is just so awful, and that's wrong and stuff," right? And then and believe there was one or two other people there that got it. I don't want to act like I was the only one, you know. I'm telling the story from my viewpoint, but basically, that's where I brought up the fact that you had to know what was going on. This is where I started bringing up the fact that you can read things three ways: the work itself, what's going on with the author, and what's going on in history in the world at the time. And I'm always stuck on this. I don't know where I got this, but I feel like Kafka was hitting on things because history does repeat itself. We're actually reliving a lot of things in the 30s that were going on in my opinion, the last couple of years that were going on in the 30s over in Europe and stuff, right? Not to get into it. So when I was reading this, my interpretation is that Kafka was I don't know the guy. I don't know what his history was, what was going on. I knew what was going on at the time.
Yeah, he was from Prague, but he was also German and Jew. I
Right.
think he was Jewish.
Yeah. I felt like he could see the writing on the wall because he knew of things that had happened before. And he was putting it together, and it was all laid out to him like a puzzle coming together. I could be wrong, but after reading his stuff and what we touched on in that class, that's what I came up with. You know, whether I'm right or wrong, our interpretations, that's where they come from. That's why facts matter, you know. So you get an idea and you can run with it, and it just makes sense to you, even though it could be totally wrong. And I think that also is part of Kafka's work, also, ironically. You know, I don't know. I can't believe I woke up this morning and I'm talking about Kafka and remembering a class from 23 years ago, you know. So
Do you remember how your peers liked the story? Did they enjoy the story?
two people were fascinated with it, and we did end up talking a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Of course, we had another assignment and we moved on. Everybody else in the class was just a god. They were just, oh my God, like they couldn't. I don't know if it was a small town. I hate to say that, a small town mentality, or if this is the first time they read something that wasn't Stephen King. You know,
Yeah.
they've read horror before, but now they're reading something with real life implications of fascism and the themes they've never been exposed to. And now that I'm sitting here talking to you and not wanting to sound like, I don't want to sound pretentious now that I'm thinking about it, remembering that time and stuff, but it's almost like they finally read something that had real stakes and consequences of things that were really going on. Instead of worrying about a clown in this little town of Derry torturing some kids, you know, I'm like, you know,
No, it's not pretentious, Tim. It has to do again
yeah,
with our education system, right? It
yeah.
has to be also with the quality of teachers.
They grew up
Also,
in that's what I was trying to get at. They grew up in America, and now they're hearing about things that go on elsewhere, you know. So yeah.
no, it has to do with that, absolutely. And what are the stories that you read in that class? Do you remember?
Of course, we read some Vonnegut, Kurt Vonnegut,
Okay.
Slaughterhouse. I mean, the basic stuff. Slaughterhouse Five, Catcher in the Rye. Luckily, I'd already read that. I'd already touched on a little bit of Vonnegut.
Okay.
And believe it or not, I got a break in there because they want us to read some Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe.
Hmm.
Already well versed in that one. Now hold on, and then we had a list of short stories,
So
and
far,
it
it's pretty
was
good. I mean,
yeah,
it's a pretty good list so far.
yeah. And then it was a 5-week class. We had to read a ton of stuff, and then we had
Yeah.
an actual book that had a bunch of short stories, and I can remember the stories. There's a story about a kid with his dad driving. It's the author's viewpoint. They're riding on fresh snow. It's all going to like start come pouring out. You're taking me back. I remember the stories. Oh my God. Leo DiCaprio played Thomas Wolfe, a bunch of Thomas Wolfe stories, I
Well,
think.
Thomas Wolfe wrote, I know he was a novelist, You Can't Go Home Again was one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Or something with an angel. I've never read him, but I know he was quite
Yeah.
popular in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. But like I said, it was a standard, we read other things, but we had these standard college book that you would buy with a bunch of short stories with varied short stories. And we read a lot of that stuff. Oh, it's all going to come rushing back to me in a minute. But like I said, I looked up 2 or 3 of those books I'd already read. So Catcher in the Rye, I can't read anymore because I was fascinated with the book because it had that feeling of truth and the air that was in it. And I was totally, if you've read Salinger Catcher in the Rye, there's a part in the book where he's at a bar and he's watching a piano. And stop me. I'm kind of streaming and I'm just remembering as I speak. But I remember reading the book and what is his name? Yeah,
Caldwell.
yeah, he's
Something
there
like
watching a piano player and he's dissecting it. I had already done this before with what he was sort of doing, but he was sitting there thinking, this guy's putting on a performance. It's not authentic. He knows when to smile. He knows when to hit the right keys and perform for everybody, but he's done it
that.
so much it's not authentic. And that was my jaded self. I mean, that I got it. And then you get to the part. Now I read that book. I started reading it about a year or two ago, and I can't stand the kid. It's something about your moment in life
Mhm.
and then where you are later on in life, all the years that go by. And
It
I was,
reminds me a little bit of Ferris Bueller. He's a kid who's
yeah,
from a privileged background, and it's like, what are you complaining about?
hmm
That's why I have difficulty with Ferris Bueller's, and I have a lot of problem with Howard with the Hughes films. I had problems back then,
yeah.
but I think in that book, Catcher, I didn't read that till I was already an adult, and I liked it when I read it, but I don't think I would ever revisit the book. But the history of that book is interesting because Salinger carried that manuscript because if I remember correctly, Salinger was at D-Day.
Yeah.
And he had the manuscript with him when they helped liberate one of the concentration camps. And I always found that curious. So that little book was with him, even though when he was, at there in Europe. And but that's the only thing I read by him. I remember friends liked him a lot when I was at university. They read Visit Fanny and Zoe and other things. Again, books that I've never read.
I
And
almost bought Fanny and Zoe the other day at Books a Million last weekend.
I
They
mean,
have it for $10.
$10. So, but again, it didn't go beyond. Again, I just read it one day. I saw it and never read it, and I liked it well enough. And but again, I can't revisit it. I,
Well,
it was a high school
thinking
thing
of the
for me.
era when it came out, I told, yeah. Let's do some comments here,
Oh yeah, we got about the comments. Yeah.
and then we'll go wherever you want. Here we go. Mastodon. Now check this out. Perfect. Mastodon comics and music. New wave of British heavy metal. He had other things to say. I think I. Here we go.
Yeah, Donnie
Let me
knows a
back
lot
up.
about music.
I recommend the biopics Control, which was mentioned on that show yesterday.
Oh yeah,
24.
24-hour party people.
Yep.
Yeah, the movie Control is very good, and the 24-hour party is also very good. They're all on YouTube.
Fantastic. New wave of British heavy metal was similar story. Most of those bands formed in response to the burgeoning punk movement. Steve Harris of Iron Maiden absolutely despises the punk game. I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan, and I don't want to say I'm eclectic, but if it came down to it, I can listen to punk and metal all day long. I'm still making peace with my 2 years or so of being really into the hair music, thanks to the girls of the time and MTV. I've I've had to make peace with it, and I'm the only one worried about it. But it really bothers me. Marvel hasn't cared about continuity since Shooter left. Ever since the three editors just let writers do whatever they want. When DeFalco was there, you could kind of see he was just letting everybody go in retrospect. If we go into comic book history and stuff, what happened to the Fantastic Four book was just looking back on that era after Shooter left and stuff is just atrocious. I'm like, oh, this was really bad. Ramos is here. Good morning. I first learned of Frank Kafka in my high school German class. Fantastic, Mastodon. We're, you know, and I remember reading Asimov in high school, and the one story that sticks out is a short story about a family that's afraid to go out in the rain because they were made of sugar. See, I automatically went caves of steel. I remember the first Asimov I read, made of sugar. Oh, there will come soft rains. Why did this just pop in my head? Is that
Pretty good
Bradbury
memory.
or
I never
Ellison?
read that end of my story.
Um, oh, well, there's all sorts of things on YouTube where it's a short story that's almost like it's more poetry,
Mm-hmm.
and people have given it visuals and stuff. There will come soft rain. Unfortunately, with the way my house was, with all the books that was around,
Yes.
without going to, I've talked about it before. Ray Bradbury and Harlan Ellison merged for me to where they're almost one author. One author. It's really sad because I just own it and I put it out before we go into deep talks because their stuff is just one for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they're very divergent writers. I mean, Bradbury's known as the poet of
yeah,
science fiction because his stuff is very, very poetical and a little bit sentimental at times. One thing you could never say about Harlan, he's not sentimental and he's not poetic.
Yeah.
He's in your face. He's a working class kid. He's always been a working class kid in his writing, and tough as nails. And Bradbury. I think my favorite Bradbury story is called Kaleidoscope, and I think that's in the Illustrated Man,
Right.
where you have this space shuttle or rocket, and it's been hit by a bunch of meteors, and then you have the astronauts are just thrown into the void, and for like each one gets a little paragraph. One's heading into the sun, another heading into the earth, and one's heading into an asteroid belt, and they have a limited amount of oxygen. They know they can't be rescued in time, and you have these little moments in time. I mean, they're going to die, and it's one of the frustrations of again in our education system is that kids have to read Fahrenheit 451, and a book that I like, a book that probably you like, people here like, but given that the fact that most kids just do not read for fun anymore, and this book was from a different generation, why would someone care about people burning books? Why would someone care? Why would someone want to memorize Don Quixote or Jane Austen or the Divine Comedy, right, to keep it? Why would that be important? Because I've rarely ever met a high school kid who reads these books who find it engaging. Instead, they should be reading the Martian Chronicles or should be reading his short stories. That really engages you, right?
Right.
By the way, our system is set up it's Fahrenheit 451. And they never touch upon the others. Now, even if you have a teacher who may show them the way that our curriculum is here in Texas is set up, is that, no, it's pretty rigid. It's not that you're forbidden to teach these books, not at all. You have to follow the curriculum because the tests are based on this book. The examinations everything is set up. The writing prompts are set up on this. And then if the kids don't do well on those and they find out that you've been teaching these other things, you detract it from that, you see. And it's very standardized here among my friends who are teachers. It's very frustrating for them, but that's just the reality. But that's one of those things. Again, it's very set. And then the teachers go to the local universities to become teachers to read the same books. And that's just it. And that's when and most of them don't read for fun. They just do not. So they're limited to what they were taught, and it's a microcosm of the rest of the world.
Right.
So like you mentioned about you had a good professor there at the small community you lived in. It's just a matter of of having someone there. And before I want to say something, but I know I alluded to this yesterday. One of the frustrations about us here is in England you had Top of the Pops. How many times did we see somebody from Brian Ferry to you name it saying, I was living in this small working class town in Manchester and Liverpool, whatever, and I see, somebody there on Top of the Pops. Now, Top of the Pops reached all of England, right? We didn't have anything like that here. I mean, we had great variety shows in the 70s and 80s, and sometimes they would have people on the edge, but for the most, you would never see that. Maybe SNL would have them when they had Gary Newman on, and they had David Bowie on, and a few others. But for most people in small communities, you weren't exposed to all this. Same goes with films, same goes with books. And it's just very, very frustrating, right? Anyway, I wanted to allude to that.
No, I've got to bounce off that because you hit something where, like, this is the thing where I like getting older, retrospect, things like that, being able to look back on things. Maybe our mind heals things like that, and it tricks us. I don't know. But the frustration you're talking about was something that I was a very angry young man. Looking back on it, I was a peacemaker, but, nice guy until whatever, long fuse and stuff, right? So when it came to wanting to read something, wanting to know where this comes from and stuff, that is the stuff that would trigger me because I wanted to know more, So you would hear these bands. I can remember the first time I heard Pretty in Pink by the Psychedelic Furs because it actually popped up on a radio in somebody's trailer when I was playing outside, and it was near the trailer. You went from Sweet Home Alabama to Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. Okay, you follow me? Some radio song that, was just maybe a little Jim
It's
Croce.
unusual for for that song to
That's what
pop
I'm
in.
getting at. And
Continue.
then all of a sudden, when something like that pops up,
Yeah.
they don't tell you what the song is. This is people have
Oh,
to remember I grew up pre-internet, no MTV. We didn't get cable till 1985. And here it is. It's 1981 or 82, and I'm hearing Pretty in Pink by the Psychedelic Furs that is sticking out like a sore thumb. And I never found out what it was until years later.
mm-hmm.
And then when MTV did hit, you would see maybe some of these bands that you're talking about. I thought the Smiths were from Boston because they never said these bands were from England. They would play the song, that was the Smiths, and you wouldn't get any background information. And you didn't know anything about them, until years later. Now, the part that I've kind of made peace with it is that by having these things in moderation, by having places you knew that you had to stay up late to see night tracks on TBS here, Saturday Night Live, what you're talking about, you kind of knew where to go and where to be with your television or maybe a radio show where you're going to hear something new and you had to pay attention.
Yes.
I think there's something about having to work for this stuff that makes you much more appreciative that you did have to work for it a little bit more. If something caught your ear, it's more authentic because there's a quality there.
Mm-hmm.
And having to work for it in the moderation kept it special. Does that make sense? Because, like I said, I heard all the radio songs, everything they've been playing that I could remember as far back as I could on the radio. And then when something like Psychedelic Furs pop up, you're hearing the future. I don't know. I thought I had a bit more focus on that, but I think the moderation and actually having to work for it was worth it. I think that's why I retained some of this stuff. I've watched my older videos, and I have now forgotten more than I probably knew. Now, and I'm so glad I documented some of it. So
I think. I mean, I do agree with you, and it's the idea of exposure. You give people a variety of things. I mean, you shouldn't have to live in a big city to be exposed to these things. You shouldn't have to rely. I mean, this is before the internet, like you were saying.
right.
One, there was just 3 channels and PBS, and then there was cable.
Mhm.
But even then, you wouldn't see this. I mean, again, I don't know how many times I've seen this. It was Top of the Pops, going back to the music, and how they were exposed to all this avant-garde type of music. I mean, it was considered avant-garde at the time, right? We didn't have that here that was consistent. That
Mhm.
every weekend you would go in there and you would see. I mean, could you imagine in the 70s, one of the main shows from the Johnny Cash show, which was a pretty good show, and all these shows having, today we're going to have Iggy Pop. We're going to have Lou Reed on. It's going to offend half of the population in the country,
Right.
but we're going to have them on. We're going to have the Sex Pistols on, just from England, here in 1976, here tonight, on Johnny Carson, type of thing. And although Johnny, and then they did try to have people on and such. And so, again, to expose them, it's just an idea of a variety of things. And regarding the radio, yes, I remember that on radio here in this part of Texas, where it was smaller communities. It was FM and AM. It was the same thing.
Right.
You would go from a song from the Cars to a Devo song to maybe whatever. Now, I like the Cars and I like Devo, but that was just it. There was no way a Smith song was going to come on. There was no way a Cure was going to come on. There was no way Iggy Pop. It didn't exist.
Right.
And however, if you lived in one of the bigger cities or had one that had a major University of Texas in Austin, College Station, or you had college radio, and that's where it made sense. Remember the Rolling Stone magazine would have like the top hits, and then they would have on the side college radio hits.
Yeah.
When I was younger and I would read Rolling Stones, this college radio stuff, I'm thinking, what the heck is that? All those bands had never heard of them, not one. It wasn't until I moved to a major city, college radio, and then you would turn on the college radio, not just the college, but the old radio stations. That's when you heard that.
All right. I want to bounce off that. I'm going to finish one comment here, but to bounce off what I was saying about it being special when you discover something,
Mm-hmm.
guess where I discovered Alice Cooper? You're going to
I thought they
laugh.
would have been on just regular radio, AM. Because I remember as a kid, he was everywhere.
All right. Are you
The
ready for this?
Muppets.
The Muppet Show.
That's right. The Muppets. I saw him on the Muppets.
That's where I discovered Johnny
Okay.
Cash and Alice Cooper proper. Yeah. But the college radio you're talking about, man, you segued great into about the time that I got cable and MTV. And MTV did expose me to a lot of new music.
Same.
And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, think now, the alternative scene that was hitting musically and what they were doing, I was fascinated. But when you had like the proper songs by the Smiths, and a lot of the Cure and a lot of Echo and the Bunnymen and stuff,
Yeah,
I just couldn't get into this sad thing, you know. So I'm so glad that I'm at an age where I'm coming around, and that's really what a lot of what I'm listening to now. Okay, I'm remembering Bring On the Dancing Horses when I was a kid. Now I'm enjoying it. You know what I mean? Like I would watch whatever was on. I didn't turn the channels and flip, so I was exposed to it. But when you get to the college radio stuff, this is why I'm so glad you segued into this. I started hearing about college radio because they were talking about REM all the time,
Oh yeah,
Driver
they're
8,
huge.
things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd already heard about Radio Free Europe. I'd heard these songs, right? Didn't, but there was no reference. Plus, I was like in fourth grade. You know, you're not exactly, you know, going to try to do a deep dive when you're in fourth grade riding your bike and stuff. You know, I'm still a kid. But anyway, 12, 13 is where it really hit. And there was a band called The Replacements. I'd already heard about radio and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm listening to The Replacements, and their video stuck out because they have a song called Left of the Dial. And just bear with me, and I'll get through this. But they had an album named Tim, so automatically I wanted it. Of course, our one record store at Claypool Hill Mall did not have it. So anyway, but it was a song called Left of the Dial. And when I heard this song, they made a video to where it's a bed and a speaker and a record player. And I found out later that the Replacements were against videos, so they made them film the speaker while it just vibrated playing Left of the Dial.
I didn't know that about. That's pretty funny.
Well, it was one of those songs where, like I said, I get frustrated if I couldn't figure things out. And this song meant something. This is one of those songs you could just hear something in his voice. It was a special, emotional song. And basically what they're doing is they're riding around. He's saying, he's talking in music lingo at the time where he was in a band, heard about your band in a local mag. And then what he's doing is he's riding around to all these college towns so they can perform. And if you went left of the dial on your radio, that's where all the college stations were. Years later, I find out this is a great rock and roll love song. He had met a girl who played in another band. This is before, like I said, internet. You can't get no cell phones and things like that. But you know, they had like a whirlwind romance for a couple of days, and then their bands went separate ways. They're in their vans and their cars, and they're playing all the college towns, and they have no idea when they're going to see each other because they take the gigs when they can. And the whole song is about him hoping that he runs into her by going left of the dial to hear if they're playing in the town and stuff like that. You know, so it's like this desperation of like we're separated by our rock and roll. Our real love has separated what us from having what our real love could be. And I'm just like, that's brilliant. And it was all because of college radio and looking at the college magazines to see if her band was playing. They don't know where they're going to be. They can't share phone numbers. They don't know what hotel they're going to be in. If they crisscrossed, and it was killing them. So he wrote a song, you know. That's the stuff I loved with music, you know, when you figured out those stories behind it.
Yeah, college radio in that sense was for us who are comic readers. It's like our own little world because when you were around just college music, all the mainstream stuff, it didn't filter in, not because you didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
You're around that circle and somebody then suddenly, and that's when you leave that environment and you hear Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
You hear, you know, the new Michael Jackson song. You hear the new Bruce Springsteen song.
Right.
You know, and suddenly you're thinking, you know, I haven't heard this stuff in at least a year, you know, or something like that, right?
Right.
And then it really is another world. And also with the people you're around. If there's extremes like that, where this group here doesn't hear this, and this group here doesn't hear this.
Right.
It's almost like politics too, right? The way people are with general politics now, right? Or you are with many things now. There's divisions of all these things, and there's no middle ground. It's not even a middle ground thing.
it really is a culture that was made through the music.
Yeah.
And what I liked about it is that if you were part of it, there was things that everybody had a zeitgeist that they knew. And the famous one is Motorhead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I listened, like I said, I was a, little punk. I mean, I listened to, it seems like a lot of my music came out of CBGBs that I enjoyed, but I didn't know all those bands were from CBGB. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But I got into the punk. I would hear these things in a movie soundtrack, or maybe somebody would have a mixtape. I started hearing Dead Kennedys and things like that. But then you had Motorhead. Okay, there was a huge division between my heavy metal friends, and then I'm over here kind of listening to punk. And I was actually more of a punk than a metalhead. I just didn't know it, if I was really going to be that way. But Motorhead was the one band that the metalheads and the punks would agree on. Like they were the peace ambassador between the two. And that amazes me because nobody made that rule. It happened organically through the music. So there's this authentic in high school. What I really enjoyed, just to kind of give you a little background, is this town that I'm living in now is about 30 miles from where I grew up. But in this town, there was about 30 people I met at skating rinks, and everybody played an instrument, and most people taught themselves. So this is like 88 to about 1991, and the last time I played in a band was 2013
Okay.
at the school I was working at. And what it was is everybody, they had their little bands and stuff, but like I was the guy that knew all the words and could shout. I can't sing, but I can shout like Metallica and sing um, Inner Sandman. So they would call me up and like, "Where's Tim at? We're at this guy's garage." So I would pop in there so they could play Inner Sandman. We know who to call because this one guy knew the entire song "Paranoid" by Black Sabbath. He knew the guitar solo and everything, so we would call him up if we wanted to play some Black Sabbath. And that's what we did. We had fun with it. There was a whole culture over here, not culture, but just a bunch of kids who all just loved music, and we
Yeah.
played around like that. Nobody was thinking they were going to be famous one day. So that was like that was part of the culture too, is that you didn't just listen to this stuff. And of course, some of us would really go deep and have these stories. When grunge hit, it was some fantastic story, fantastic takes on it. Like grunge was actually, a lot of people weren't into grunge because they still listened to Black Sabbath. It's like the 80s never happened. You know what I mean? It was like
Yeah.
they're just picking up where some of these bands picked up, to them in their eyes. And I'll stop it there because I'm just going on and on. But yeah, the love of music. You had people who would buy guitars and show them off and talk about how they do it. They would never play them. But then you had people who loved music and they would buy the whatever they could afford, and they would actually get out there and just play it, even if it was just for fun.
It was in the 90s that I knew that people began to sell off their 80s record collection. And I remember friends of mine who were selling off their early 80s albums from Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, and all
Hmm.
those mostly British bands that we were listening to. And they were just taking them off to record stores. We don't need them anymore. And you're right, because much of the 90s, much of that music, there was this period where that music was looked down upon. It was really quite interesting how fast that happened.
Hmm.
I mean, I mentioned Duran Duran, and Duran Duran began to really drop off by the late 80s and 90s. You already had this strong apathy or worse
Yep.
toward them. And it wasn't until the 2000s, again, when all these new bands began to emerge, uh, and electronic bands, rock and roll bands. And what was happening with them, I think I mentioned this yesterday, was that almost like the whole 90s didn't exist for these bands.
Right.
They were going back to the late 70s and the 80s. Bands like the Killers, Bravery, the Ya Ya Ya's, Ladytron, Franz Ferdinand, the Hive, the Strokes. They were going to the electronics, the punk bands from that era. And it's almost like the 90s was not an influence at all. You had anomalies, like maybe like Radiohead in the late 90s.
Hmm.
And such, you had oddballs like that, right? And maybe Beck and such. Um, and Portishead. And Portishead is another one. They were just oddballs. And then Pulp, which was an English band from England, and Saint Etienne, also from England, which I like in the 90s. But I think in the 90s, there was I remember when grunge came on, and I remember older friends of mine would be really angry.
I think Mastodon's leaving. He's left some
Oh,
or something, or he's just wanting to address it. Uh,
oh,
he's enjoying the show, so thank you, Mastodon. And
thank you, Don. It's good
I have
seeing you.
no idea what I was talking about, but I'm glad I had some
Looking up there.
coherent thoughts.
But then same here.
uh,
No, the same here, Tim. I mean,
okay, go ahead. I'm
my
sorry.
coherent thoughts. No, my coherent thoughts. No, by Don. Donnie's, he's a wonderful YouTuber, and he's one of the few that actually does music on his YouTube channel. We're talking about music. Yeah, but there was that sense, and then I when the grunge came on, the older people that I knew were pissed off, saying, "This is not grunge; it's just basic rock and roll.
Hmm.
All they're doing is stuff from the '70s. Kurt Cobain's not doing anything new." And I remember that would piss off the younger generation, going, "No, Kurt Cobain, this is something new." And I go, "No, it's not. It's just basically rock and roll from the '70s. That's all he's doing." And his hair's just a little bit longer and mopey and whatever, and there's not much there. And but I think if you go back to the '50s, right, those early rock and roll bands, in a way, because I think even the punk bands didn't use the word punk. I think it was just
Uh-huh.
applied to them, right? Because they were just being. But when you think about it, they're just rock and roll bands. That's rock and roll from them to the Kinks, the Beatles, the Stones, the
Mhm.
Doors, Love, um, Zeppelin, you name it, right? They're just an Iggy Pop. They're just rock and roll
Yeah.
bands. They're not prog. They're not punk. They're not whatever, right? Blondie. And then when Gary Newman came in with all his electronic stuff, right? And then people were pissed off because they were saying you're not a real musician if you use synthesizers. But in a way, yeah, it doesn't have guitar, but if it's rebellious, yes, it's also like rock and roll, and this is an extension of all these things. But I still categorize them like that here and there myself. But in the end, it really is rock and roll. It's not classical. It's not
Right.
orchestra. It's not the big band era, right? And it's just what it is. And there's a certain rebelliousness to it and such and such. And there is a difference between that and the ballads, and stuff like that, and hip hop. But even hip hop, some of the early hip hop is very, very punk, well, very rock and roll, And but yeah,
Um, I actually wish my wife was here for this one. This may make you laugh. I'd like to bounce on something you said about the early 2000s, but hip hop. 1982. I'm 9 years old. I'm in this little coal mine camp that I talk about all the time, and there's a yard sale. I've said this before on the channel, and for something like I think it was like $2 or $3, I end up getting this box, this box of cassettes, right? So I have to go there, and there's things like, oh my god, I'm going blank on it. It's got the Manhattans,
mm-hmm.
Rubber Band Man, Whiter Shade of Pale, Percy Sledge,
Mm-hmm.
and then it has 2 or 3 mixtapes, and I'm hearing Sugar Hill Gang. I'm hearing Don't Push Me because I'm close to the edge. This I was like this little snob when Bust a Move and all this stuff came out later. I was like this snob, like that's not the real stuff. These guys aren't from the street. That's overproduced. I turned into that guy, and I just thought it was so funny. And then the first time I heard NWA, when I walked into said record shop, they were actually playing NWA,
yeah.
the first album, and it was the first time music had scared me and excited me at the first time. I had been excited. Slayer freaked me out. Don't get me wrong. The first time I heard Slayer and things like that. But NWA, I was like, this is real. I thought I was hearing real stories. You know what I mean? So hip hop was exciting. And I was so glad that some of the bands that I had, Anthrax got with Public Enemy, did Bring the Noise and things like that. I was into Run DMC. I really liked Run DMC, tougher than leather. I'll still yell that at weird times sometimes. So hip hop was like a shot in the arm, but it was sort of like the new rock and roll a little bit during the hair bands because they were scary. They were the rebels.
That's
You
right.
had some things going on. One of the things, if you don't mind, can I bounce off something you said about the early 2000s?
No, Tim, whatever.
And please, if you want to take us somewhere, that's fine. I mean, we're just shooting from the hip here. I'll go wherever you want to go with these things. But one of the things that you brought up was like you said about the early 2000s. In the 90s, it was around 93 or 94 that I finally was able to come around to this new alternative scene of music and stuff. 93 was a great year. But a lot of those bands sounded like the Pixies. And I discovered the Pixies with Doolittle, and I discovered Violent Femmes way after with American
Mhm.
music and stuff. And that's what brought me out my music journey of those hair bands that I, jokingly say I was ashamed of, right? So I was hearing these bands, and I thought Smelled Like Teenage Spirit, Smells Like Teen Spirit. I thought they were a Pixies wannabe band
Mm.
because I was like, oh, he yells, he screams, and he goes on. 3 months later, that album blows up. I remember it was summer when I heard it, right? I heard some Liz Fair. I heard a lot of these other bands come on. I'm trying to think of the one that sings Seether. Veruca Salt. Veruca Salt had a song, Number One Blind. It sounds exactly like the Pixies. So a lot of that stuff didn't really amaze me. And then in 93, I saw the culture change. I went to Roanoke. I saw Guns N' Roses with Blind Melon opening up for them. And
Mhm.
everybody was wearing that. We show up in our basic black.
Yeah.
I had just finally cut off my mullet. Everybody, me and my 3 or 4 friends, we're showing up in your black concert, and it's a bunch of kids sitting there singing "Black" by Pearl Jam in their, what were the shirts, the flannel and everything. And I'm like, oh, the scene's changed. And while they're playing No Rain, people are still trying to like stage dive and mosh and stuff. And I'm like, what is going on? So people forget for a lot of people that culture change in music and in the
Yeah.
music scene and everything like that was very a lot of people didn't adjust well. It was a very confusing time. It took us a little while. It took a little while for everybody to, thank God for Hootie and the Blowfish because a lot of people went with them. Okay, that was the only thing they could understand. Years go by. I thought the 90s fizzled out. 90s never did anything. 90s to me, as much fun as I had. I was 20 years old in 93. Great year. Enjoyed the music, enjoyed X Files, Ultraverse, and um, Valiant Comics. Everything was cool. I liked it. I dug it. Right. But by the time 96, 97 came around, I'd figured out that in my mind, every decade has an identity. I mean, that's just how I thought. What's going to be the next thing that ushers us into the 90s? But by like 96 or 97, with the rise of the boy bands and Disney kids taking
Mhm.
over music and everything, I'm sort of like, it's kind of like the 90s had a big brother named the 80s, and they couldn't live up to their big brother. They were trying to be their big brother, and it fizzled out. Now we get to the 2000s, and you have this band you talked about, Jet. You Want to Be My Girl? I'm now 27, 28, 29 years old, and I have listened to music for so long, I'm hearing other songs.
Mhm.
There's this. If you go back and listen to Little Sister by oh my God, Queens of the Stone Age. If you go back and look at the videos for Liz Fair, Tell Me Why, and things like that, they were trying to be 1981 and 82.
Mm.
And I hear Jet, You're Gonna Be My Girl. I hear AC/DC. But the Killers were the one that got me, right? I finally figured out what was going on in my head listening to this stuff. They have a song called Mr. Brightside.
Mhm.
If you go back and listen to Queen Bitch by Ziggy, there's a little part where there's a little bridge going into the chorus. They took that, like, I don't know, 5 seconds of that little bridge in that song, and they based the entire song, Mr. Brightside, on David Bowie's Queen Bitch. I was like,
Mm.
wow, because I'm into Bowie. I've always been into Bowie.
Mhm.
So it was really cool to start hearing this music coming back, but I was hearing it being very derivative, yet the songs were catchy. It was like radio
Mhm.
friendly and it was fun. And I think we needed that because the early 90s was very dark. Serial killers became very popular. You know what I mean? News
Yeah.
had started turning into from Tom Brokaw to the National Enquirer. People forget the 90s, the 80s had a very melancholy
Mhm.
feel despite it being a party, but the 90s were very dark.
The 90s was the emergence of talk radio, for
Yeah.
one. Talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, and the success of people just getting on the radio and ranting, and it ended up being very successful. It was, we all know, it was the Clinton era, um, and the end of the Cold War, but we weren't sure what was going to happen to the former Soviet Union, right?
Yep.
The former Yugoslavia was becoming into a little bloodbath, and was always in the news. Rwanda was in the news quite a bit.
Kids saw the Challenger blow up while sitting in the
Oh, that's right.
classroom.
The
Yeah.
challenge, that's right.
Yeah.
And there was an era basically, because up until that point, we if you put it in that dichotomy of quote unquote good versus evil, right? When the Cold War was on, with the Western powers being good and the East being evil, so to speak. But now that the Cold War was over, and what was the purpose of of the superpowers? I mean,
Mhm.
well, now there's only one superpower, and that's the U.S., and that's it. And then there's everybody else. And then up until then, a lot of music was Cold War infused. I mean, Nina's Red Balloons, but not only that, David Bowie's music. There's always some Cold War element that the bomb's going to
Right.
trip up at one point.
Heroes by Bowie. Yeah.
Red Bowie, and also with comics, right? Ever since the bomb went off in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and then it infused the creativity of filmmakers and storytellers and movies and in comics, right? The mutations and all that sort of thing in comics and such. And so now where are we going to go in the 90s? What's going to be it? And it wasn't until, in a way, the tragedy and the horror of 2001, it's almost you have now that, right?
Uh-huh.
Where the terror is not a superpower, it's something that's unknown. And it could happen anywhere at any time and such. And then you had that environment influencing them. But certainly in the 2000s, when you mentioned the Killers, they have the song Shadow Play, which is a Joy Division song. And it was like that generation of musicians who were going back, but for that era, but they were skipping all the 90s. And for the most part, as an influence, at least it seemed that way.
Yeah. Now let me make it clear. I loved all those bands and all those songs.
Mm-hmm. No, I didn't misunderstand you. No, I understand you did. Yeah.
Now I'm going to throw this out there because I've actually sort of had this discussion a little bit where it comes like 9/11 and the Berlin Wall. We had a teacher walk out when the Berlin Wall came down. He gave us the history of the Berlin Wall and what had happened, and then he had quit. There's already something going on behind the scenes with him and the principal. So I remember the Berlin Wall coming down because the one teacher we all liked ended up quitting. We didn't know what was going on. He took the time to finish the class with us, and then he left. We had respect for him, So I remember the Berlin. That's why I remember the Berlin Wall very well. It's also when I discovered the Utah Saints. That we're talking about music. It's my soundtrack.
You know why did he quit then? Do you know?
I don't know. We didn't know. There was something
going on. It was tied into the Berlin Wall.
It had nothing to do with the curriculum. It had nothing to do with what he was teaching us.
Yes.
There was something already going on between him and the principal to begin with.
Oh, I thought it had something to do with the Berlin Wall coming down.
Well, when the wall came down, so did his relationship.
It coincided.
To get symbolic, the wall comes down the same time his relationship finally crumbles with the school.
Okay.
Great, good man. That's where I was going with this. Oh yeah. So anyway, and like I said, a big part of the early 90s was heroin. I always leave that out, the drug scene. I've always been very aware of the drug scene because I grew up with the 70s of the hippies who were strung out. They didn't have the love that they had in the 60s. So I've always been aware of like a drug scene, just a reality. I'm a social worker, so it just permeated everything. So anyway, there was heroin there and stuff, right? So if you go back and I'm going to use pop culture reference, watch the 1976, 77 King Kong movie with Jeff Bridges.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part where they have King Kong on this boat. They're leaving Skull Island, and somebody says, I bet they're going to be happy that he's gone. And Jeff Bridges corrects him and is like, no, you took away the magic in their life. They're going to be depressed and fall into drunkenness and whatever drugs they have and stuff. And I kind of feel like the party that was the 80s and that feel of the Cold War and everything that we kind of had that kind of made things exciting, even if we didn't know it. People tend to forget conflict and a little bit of drama is what brings magic into being creative and stuff. People are aware of their mortality or whatever. They have something that they have to try to get through. I kind of think some of that Cold War ending and stuff after growing up in it is one of the reasons heroin went up in the early 90s. They didn't have that magic in life. So they're like, what am I going to get high on now? Life wasn't doing it for them. And that reflected in the darkness of the music of grunge even though some of that stuff was drug related, but it was also because they lived in Seattle and it rains all the time. Rain brings a melancholy. That was not as crisp as I liked it would have been, but I didn't want to keep going on around the bush and try to hit it. But I think the Cold War ending did have an effect on a lot of people, that our culture that we're not even sure of. The zeitgeist changed.
Mhm. Certainly,
The end of an era.
yeah, certainly. I'm now going over 20 years since September the 11th, and the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the rise of nationalism and fascism in Russia. It's the police state. As we've been in the news recently, the death of one of their leaders, basically like Kafka's story.
Right.
He just died mysteriously, and they can't find his body. And what they will turn in the body of Nevesny to his family is that. Um, but surely there was this, at least in film, for example, in 2001. I remember the show 24. It
Yeah.
coincided when 2001 came on. It was like this show was already there. It was like almost something was already there in the mindset of the writers. I like 24. I think it was a wonderful show. And then you had the Bourne films, right? Now the Bourne novels had been around for a while, but now they were put in the context of
Right.
fighting terrorism and such, or fighting within our own government, rogue elements in the government. And such.
Right.
And but that was just continuum, and I think that's part of the reason when Iron Man blew up in 2008. I don't know how many people I knew who were ex-military who never read comics
Okay.
loved that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And but when I saw the film, I like the film a lot. I think it's pretty good. One of the better Marvel films, I think. And but I saw why, because it's still because all up until this point we had the wars obviously, but in film and then we had these stories of these type of military type of stories,
Right.
and when you're fighting some kind of terror element, but I can see why it appealed to so many of them, but not just to them, but to the general public. It was a huge success, and but even though the Marvel element, they caught on to that, and but he said that was the way it was. And you were talking about comics earlier, what a good era it was in comics. Up until 2008, you said, I think, and when you were reading them. And one thing I will forget before I touch on, you touched on Jeff Loeb.
Right.
I've not read those Hulk books, but the Loeb books I do like. I think they're quite, him and Tim Sale, the collaboration of stuff that they've done, I think is quite remarkable. I mean, the sense that, those two books, which I think are Elegy Death or For Death, the one of Spider-Man Blue and Daredevil Yellow, where in Daredevil you have a letter that Matt Murdock is writing to a dead Karen Page.
Right.
In Spider-Man Blue, you have every year, I think that's it, on Valentine's Day or the birthday of Gwen Stacy.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Parker goes up to a basement and makes a recording like he's talking to her. And when I read those things, I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. When I like the stories, but I find the writing aspect of it by Loeb, of these two stories, about two people who are dead, loved ones, and how they
Mm-hmm.
did these wonderful stories with it. But yeah, I wanted to mention that it has nothing to do with what we were talking about earlier. But
No,
how
so
good they were.
we'll talk about anything you want because this is all from the
Yeah.
hip. I know things were structured on the other show, but you know, I've more or less did this show because you guys juiced me up. I was going to skip this weekend, but I'm like, no, man, I feel like talking. Jeff Loeb, if you don't mind talking about
No,
comics,
no.
and mix up, we'll go wherever you want. Jeff Loeb, I find very interesting. I do like his work. Every now and then, he doesn't stick to a landing with a story, but who does? You know what I mean? Like, there's that to me, that's not so much a flaw.
Mhm.
That turns into I wouldn't have done it that way with a few things. But when Jeff Loeb writes for DC versus for when he writes with Marvel, I always felt like it was two different writers. It really blew my mind. I have a feeling Jeff Loeb grew up a Marvel zombie because he gets very, oh my goodness, nostalgic with what he writes.
Mm.
That's where I haven't read those in forever, but Hulk Gray, Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man, Gwen
Blue.
Stacy. He does the Hulk. He pulls in characters from the past and stuff. But when he goes to DC comics, he'll move a story forward. Superman, Batman. That's the main work I'm thinking of off the top of my head. When it was that book where Superman and Batman and Abe McGinnis was drawing it and everything.
Mhm.
He did the Lex Luthor. He had like a contemporary story. And then he followed that up with this great story where there's the Legion of Supervillains came down, took Superman and Batman, changed time, raised them as their kids. And next thing you know, we have Commandy and the Haunted Tank and things like that. So he like writes stories where he likes all these characters that he loved. That feels like he's like, I'm just going to throw a story together. You know what I mean? The stuff he does at DC feels a little bit more haphazard and like a little kid that's just excited that he gets to play with some toys. When he goes to Marvel, he's reminiscing about things he loved. Does that make sense? A different kind of love.
What do you think of the Dark Halloween books and stuff like that?
Dark Halloween was the twist that he did. That was his best writing. I'm going to spoil it for everybody because I was right there. It's Harvey Dent. I was the guy like, okay, I'm not really getting why this is so hyped up. This is well done. Tim Sale's art was on point. I mean, I dug it. But when we had the twist that it was Harvey Dent's wife that was the killer, it was so obvious you could have kicked yourself. He got us. Spectacular writing. I think it's his best uh, craft work, if you will, with that big twist ending. I mean, why he's not writing more mysteries, I don't know. I mean, like that was brilliant. When you find out who it was, all right there. Harvey Dent's motivations changed. He was actually protecting his wife. It goes with the history of Harvey Dent being a great man before he became Two-Face. It was all there. Brilliant.
Last night there was a John Comics with Kids. He's a fellow YouTuber. You might know him. He was on a show, a panel with people discussing the TV show Lost.
Yep.
And in the conversation, they mentioned that Jeff Loeb work on Lost.
I think so. Jeff Loeb's done so much with television.
Yeah.
He may have stuck. I'm sure he stuck his finger in almost anything in the 2000s.
Okay.
I don't
I
know.
want to say they mentioned it him. It was when Brian K. Vaughan, my bête noir,
Yeah.
And him were both in season 2. They mentioned, and I want to say it was Loeb, but I didn't know he did television.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know he worked on Heroes, and that's how Tim Sale got on there to be the ghost artist for the actual artist on the show.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I met Tim Sale, and he made some scratch off of his work outside of comics, at least because he had handlers. You know what I mean? He had not just one handler; he had several. And when he decided he wanted to shut down everything and do a commission,
Yes.
it's like nobody else existed, and he had 2 or 3 handlers like this, making sure nobody bothered him. Oh my goodness, we've touched on a lot of things that Mastodon and a few other people really like, so this is actually going really well. Are there any other bands you can think of that you want to recommend outside of what we've talked about? The music thing. Oh
well, I like a lot. I do like a lot of. I know Mastodon's not really keen on some of these pop artists, but that's fine because we all like music. And the early 2000s, back to the music. Then,
oh yeah.
I think Donnie was doing the stream one day, and I commented in the chat some of the bands that I liked, and I think he was probably disappointed in me. And some of the girl bands I like. I think it all started really big with the late 90s. You had Britney, right? The emergence of Britney. And Destiny's Child and the female bands. But then in the early 2000s, one thing I just found just utterly fascinating was all these really sexualized female pop singers that emerged. And the funny thing is, you had mentioned many of them were ex-Mickey Mouse people. They were some of them were ex-Mickey Mouse people. They worked for the rodent, as they call it. And I remember when Britney's Toxic came out. And I enjoyed Toxic. But then from there, you had Christina Aguilera. Now Shakira had been around because Shakira had been doing music in Spanish for a few years. And I already knew Shakira's music in Spanish from the late 90s, and I liked her a lot. But I was surprised when Shakira emerged in the early 2000s. And then you had, remember the Russian duo Tattoo?
Oh, I remember Tattoo very well. I dug
Remember
it.
that too? And I remember when I saw them on MTV, and now you see all these little girls. I mean, I went to Catholic school, and I
Right.
remember the girls in their sexy outfits.
Well,
And
I
here
want
I
to show
see them.
you a few things as you talk. Here's the
Oh,
Spice
there we
Girls,
go.
Rolling
How
Stones,
could I forget those Spice Girls from the late '90s? That's right.
Jennifer
And
Aniston.
there we go, Jennifer Aniston.
But
And so you had them, and then you had, but for me, the ones that did get me. Oh yeah, Nelly Furtado is another one that I really like. But the two primarily ones that are like, one was from Australia and the other one's from England. Was
right,
Dido, and I think Dido became probably more famous when she did that collaboration with Eminem and Alison Goldfrapp. And the Goldfrapp is not as well known here as maybe Dido is. But those two, when it came to female pop artists from the early 2000s, I still listen to them now quite a bit, and I like them very much. I mean, Dido was known for that song "I Want to Thank You," which again,
uh-huh,
she did a version with Eminem, and Goldfrapp. Her music appeared in the first film that Emily Blunt. I think it's Emily Blunt's first movie she made. It's called "My Summer of Love,"
uh-huh.
where she plays a vicious teen, upper class teen who befriends a working class Irish girl. I think she's Irish, and her brother. And now she's like a Lolita, and in the making. And but the music is by Alison Goldfrapp. It's very atmospheric and such. But certainly from that era, Goldfrapp and Dido, or some of the, at least from, I mean, I guess pop music, and I guess the Yeah Yeah Yeahs when it comes to rock and roll bands are the
Maps and
ones,
yeah,
yes,
Zero.
and all of them, and again, at least with the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and such, how much whenever I listened to them, how much you saw a little bit of Chrissy Hine in there from the
Mhm.
Pretenders, right, and such, and I still like them a lot. And then the wonderful stuff like Gorillas and such, and from that era, it was a really exciting time from 2000s up until even past 2010. The emergence of Coldplay became very prominent. I like Coldplay and such, and Radiohead continued to be Radiohead. You know,
I think it's like the last renaissance we may have had there for a while,
it was
because a lot
huge.
of the
Yeah,
people doing the music would
yeah, it
talk
was
about
huge.
their influences. They've been around,
Yeah,
they grew up on MTV, and they came in and their influences were right there. But there's a little bit of a problem with some of these guys being a little bit, a few of these acts where you could have, it was like reading Justice League in the 60s. You could have switched them around. A funny story that, if I can tell it right, people always laugh, but you're aware who Pink is, right?
yep. Her
Okay.
music was there. I was never keen on her music, but continue. But
Okay.
yes, Pink.
Do you
Pink.
know who
Right.
Robin is? Robin from Sweden. She has a song, Dancing by Myself, and she had an album called Robin is Here. If you don't know her, it's
I
all
think
right.
so. I don't know.
Robyn. Now, here's the
Okay.
deal. Robin came out with her video, and she had short blonde hair, and she was kind of acting all street and everything like that, or something was going on. And I was like, okay. And then a few months later, Pink's video debuted, at
Okay.
least in my point of view when it came out. I thought they had I thought they had pulled Rob. I thought they were the same person. I thought they had pulled Robin's video and decided to street her up a little bit, because all of a sudden she's acting all tough and everything.
Out of
And
back
for
girl.
years, I was telling people that Pink had another album,
Yeah.
and she went by Robin. And a few
Robin.
people agreed with me because they remembered the album title. And we all thought that she had been brought in, remanufactured, and then put back out there. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It wasn't until about 2010 that I found out there was another artist named Robin. You know, they were so interchangeable. I was not the only one that thought that. So there was a little bit of that. I don't know, overproduction. You know, things could be
Yeah,
stripped
they were,
down.
and also the way they were all dressed. I mean, those little pants and little shirt. Right, you show they were all extremely thin.
Yeah,
Now Shakira has curves, but even Shakira, seemed a little bit thin at the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And
And there's people that I reminisce about that I never thought I would. Like, I didn't take them serious for what they were doing, but I didn't
Yeah.
hate them. I bought an album. I bought one Blink 182 album. Blink 182 is the band I never thought that I would be reminiscing about, and so glad they reformed and came back. They were pop punk, and they would show them. They would do these things on MTV where they would show them hanging around their neighborhood, and
Yes.
all the kids would be like skater kids with neck tattoos hanging out at a barber shop, getting punk haircuts, and I'm like, what is this? That's not, you know what I mean? And then, of course, Tom left, and he did Angels and Airwaves, which was his art project, and I loved Angels and Airwaves. Here recently, they got back together, and I caught myself like wondering how I know all these Blink 182 songs and digging them just around the house, playing them. I never thought I would do that. And then Tom DeLonge did an interview where he explained punk, and he was absolutely right. He said, no, no. He's like, I know we do pop punk or pop. I don't know what he said. He knew he was a little bit pop, but he said, you got to understand, punk isn't about the music. It's nothing about the sound of the music. It's an attitude. And I'm like, of course it is. So they get it. And that's, I think, why I became a fan. Tom gets it.
Another one from that era. I was never keen on Blink 182 and some of those bands.
I didn't think
One,
I was,
yeah. And also one I was not keen on, but I remember how popular she was. And that was it Evanescence?
Yeah.
Was it?
The Daredevil movie, yes.
Yeah, I thought she was a striking looking woman. And I mean, I didn't dislike the music, but it just didn't appeal. And I thought it should have appealed to me, but it didn't. And it still doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
And but I remember how popular she was. And I thought that was pretty cool with young people listening.
You're getting into the emo era, which is well forgotten.
When did that word emo emerge? I remember hearing that in the 2000s, but I don't know where did that come from? Do you remember?
Well, no, I just started. It was so weird because, I could tell I turned 30. You know what I mean? I could tell, you're just growing up. You got other interests. I'm dealing with stuff.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm out of the zeitgeist and the kids are making up things. But it was killing me because all the emo kids were They had soccer moms. And even the moms were joking with them. It's like they were going to Hot Topic and they were buying all these black and white stockings. And
that's right. They were middle class kids predominantly.
Yeah. So it's like they took the look of goth and they were, I don't know, making it pop. And the joke was about killing yourself. They were depressed, but they knew it. It was very meta. So no, I don't get it. But all these bands came out. And unfortunately, now that we're talking here, who's the guy that writes the Umbrella Academy? What is his band?
Oh, I never liked that band. What's his name? I didn't like his Doom Patrol. I don't know.
His comics suck. I mean, I
did not like Doom Patrol. He did.
Why can I not think of the band? But they had a song called "I'm Okay."
Yeah, they were very popular in the 2000s. Right. People liked them a lot.
The Black Parade, Helena. I was so desperate for something authentic after I'm the guy that grew up with Pink Floyd, The Wall, Tommy, The Who's, Quadrophenia. I mean, I was that guy, I like the rock operas. I like the grittiness. I just love music and stuff, right? But I was so hungry for something gritty that I actually thought where these kids are so young in that band, they had to potentially be the next Who because I got a feeling that they
Gerard Way. I'm sorry, Gerard Way. Carson mentioned it. Tell us the word.
I can't think of the band's name. I can't believe that. But I thought those guys had been through some messed up stuff. That's why they stood out. And it turns out they were just emo, But emo was something that was like very manufactured and almost a joke amongst the people.
Sounds like it, yes. Yeah. But unfortunately now I know friends of mine when the kids they'll show them a video of the Beatles. Yeah. And just because the Beatles have that haircut, I don't know how many have told me they think the Beatles are emo. I go, what? Well, they just see the haircut and they won't even listen to the song because they'll be laughing at the Beatles for the first 1 minute of the song, of a 2-minute song. And they can't, so basically they've associated that haircut.
Yeah.
And, you've always had the brooding teenager, right?
Yeah.
But I never wasn't sure where the word emo ended up being applied to the brooding teenager.
I had two people I knew who were authentic goth. Okay. And I never thought I would see a day that I wanted to take up for goth. I ended up going to one goth party in like 1989. And it was a party and I had the dances. And this is when I figured out it was a real thing, a real culture. Right. And to me, it was still a phase. Like I had gone to Myrtle Beach one time and off the side of the road was a mini golf course. And you saw this all-American couple, a mom and a dad sitting there doing golf course, and the rebellious daughter was all dressed in black, like Death
Mm.
in a Neil Gaiman's Death in a skirt, sitting on the stump, refusing to play with him, holding her golf club. So I didn't really take golf that serious until I went to the party and people were showing me the dances and they're explaining where all this stuff came from. They had dances called picking cobwebs. So when you were dancing, it looked weird, but after you knew what they were doing, it was like, of course it's that. So I realized it was more fun, even though they were acting like broken toys at Christmas and sad and things
I think they had
and
watched the Rocky
stuff.
Horror Picture Show on their parents' VHS at one point, I suppose. And they were doing
Yes.
the time.
But it turns out it was an authentic scene. It was an authentic
Yeah.
scene with a real culture. And once I got there was a sense of humor
Mhm.
to it. I was like, it was just good to understand it a little
Well,
bit
there
more.
was because Edward Scissorhands. No,
Yeah.
no, and even before that, Beetlejuice.
It was actually because of
Remember?
Sandman. I got into a conversation about
Mm.
Sandman at a comic book store and got invited. You see,
Okay.
that's what happened. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
The unintended consequence. I remember, Beetlejuice, Winona Ryder's character, she's a little goth girl. It's one of the few times,
Yeah.
one of the early times I remember seeing that on screen. But it was made to be fun and funny, and such. And in the 80s when I used to go to I used to go to clubs and meet girls and dance and such. You're right. There was different clubs. There was.
Yeah.
I'll be in one club, for example, and then I can picture it here. We'll be dancing, but I remember you would hear like a crashing sound, like a like a not like a screech, and then you would hear the drum beat, and the audience would explode because we all knew the song, and that was Bizarre Love Triangle, the extended edition, the way it begins. I really can't emphasize how the club would just explode with that song.
Right.
And all of us knew it. We really loved the song. But I remember that audience that we were in with a mixture of people. Unfortunately, you had the frat and sorority types. That's a group I never really got along with. And then you had just the general public and such and such. But I also had friends that liked to go to other kind of clubs. And I remember we went to one where it was like, I guess it was a goth club. And that music was very different. Like you would not hear the New Order stuff in there. You would hear Ministry. Although Ministry's not a goth band, you would hear Ministry. You would hear Skinny Puppy. And also very sexual music, electronic music, very explicit sort of stuff you would hear. You wouldn't even hear Susie. I think Susie was too conservative for them. I have no idea.
Susie and the Banshees.
I'm sorry?
Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah, maybe not even them, because maybe she was too conservative for them. I don't know. But it was definitely that group. Everyone was in black.
Yeah.
There was a great, even the place was just extra dark. And you had all this smoke everywhere.
Yeah.
And but it was a different environment. And I like different environments, so I could go. But I remember some of my friends would say, "We're not going to go over there," and then the other group saying that these people would not be caught with where I would go. You see New Order dance music, and also ABBA would play at that club. I mean, where the New Order one would be, Dancing Queen and such. But yes, you did see that. This would have been in the 80s. But what I didn't realize, I mean, it's only in history, was golf was already pretty much dead everywhere except here.
Right.
And I think the peak of it was the late 70s, maybe early 80s. And when Susie and all them, they didn't call themselves golf. That's just the way they dressed, right? But even you mentioned Alice Cooper, he did sort of thing. Kiss did the whole thing. It was a whole performance thing, like you would see in
right. It was like
Rocky
an
Horror
art.
Picture Show.
It was like an art
theater.
performance.
It was theater.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why I'm saying you were talking about it being dead, and that's perfect because, like I said, they had a sense of humor about it. You wouldn't think anyway. But anyway, we have emo thing. I want to comment on my clubbing days a little bit here in a minute. Emo, short for emotional hardcore, began as an underground subculture movement in the late 80s, but exploded into pop culture in the post-grunge era. I didn't hear about it until the mid 2000s. I'm not joking.
That's when I first heard it. Was the late 2000s when I first heard it.
I immediately knew I was not a club kid because the scene here, there was the Warehouse in Princeton. There was something I went to in Roanoke.
Mhm.
I ended up at two gay bars when I was 17 and then 19. One was in Roanoke, one was in up where I'm at. I mean, I'm remembering here. But what got me is that I was dirt poor. And I was like I said, metal kid into music and all that stuff. You know, I was the ripped jeans, black t-shirts,
And
but
drink don't fit.
I was always into experience.
Mhm.
I in an odd way, maybe I should have been goth because I've always been aware of mortality. And after like not really going anywhere when I was a kid, I'm like, I wanted to see it all. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
took off and did some stuff. So I was always about the experience. I'd give anything a chance. That's why I think, and I'm glad I was like that. So I ended up going clubbing for off and on for a year around here in Princeton and Roanoke, and I hit a few raves. I was a guy that had glow sticks like drums. You know, I was that guy. If you ever see any videos of raves and stuff, but I couldn't do it because it was all rich kids. So I couldn't relate to them because they didn't grow up like I did, and they were all rich kids. They had no worries. They had daddy's car. The girls were showing up wearing blossom hats. It was the hat that you folded up and had a big
I remember
flower right on the
Blossom.
front of it, and short skirt, really sexual. And
Yes.
I couldn't relate to these people. This was a rich kid scene.
Yeah.
And then I started Roanoke was where I started seeing the party drugs. And like I said, once there's a drug culture attached to it, I fall out. You know, I just
Mhm.
there's no glamour for me in that and stuff. So the party scene, and what was great is everywhere I went, one of the first songs I would hear would be the Utah Saints "Something Good,"
Mhm.
and then in that mix they would have this club version of a song by Gene Love's Jezebel
Mhm.
called "Motion of Love."
Mhm.
And it was like I reached a point where every time those two would play, I felt like I was some wrestler entering the ring, and they're playing my theme song. You know. So I hit a few raves and stuff, but I knew right away I was not a club kid. Just two different worlds. So let me see what we got here. The Houston Emos Club opened in '89. Later had another location in Austin.
I
Right.
do remember, he mentioned that. I remember there was an emos club in Austin when I lived there, but I never went to it. I had no idea what it was. But also in Austin, when I lived there, we had a lot of bands. As you know, Austin is known for having it's one of the best music scenes in
Right.
Texas. Well, it is the best in Texas. And now, of course, it's very different now. It still is, but given the way Austin is now an international city, that many of these people can't afford to live in Austin anymore
Mm-hmm.
in the sense because all those musicians have to move out. But yeah, but basically, so I was going to see a lot of local bands, a lot of rock and roll bands in Austin. Get even into the early 2000s. I mean, you like Larry McMurtry, his son James McMurtry, is a wonderful musician, and
Nice.
he was friends with friends that I had. And so a little anecdote. Have you ever listened to James McMurtry? Uh,
No.
no. I'll send you some of his songs. First
Yeah.
rate musician. Basically, it's country folk music. And but we went to see him, and after the show, it was some bar in Austin, and we were just having drinks with him. And I remember the girl I was with at the time. Um, she had never really heard country music. She wasn't an American girl. She was from Germany, and this was one of her first introductions to this music. But he was really nice, and he says, "I have a CD. I'll send it to you." I gave him my address, and again, I just met the guy. A couple of days later, because I get the CD, and it's addressed to myself and to her, and I remember I gave it to her because she was going to be leaving at one point back to Germany. But he was, very kind man. But that was the environment in Austin. We had the rock and roll bands and such. Now this group, for example, didn't really go to the clubs, right? But for me, it was just music, right? Rock and roll and
Mm-hmm.
country such and folk music.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah, and but Austin had that environment. It's wonderful. They still do, but the thing is about the way it is now, it it's almost unrecognizable. Did you ever see the movie Slacker?
It's been a while, but yeah.
That's really okay. That's the Austin that I knew. Now it's like New York City, but well, not exactly, but it's kind of like that. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So, but no one can afford to live there. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, well, I've got tons of. I'm starting to remember things, and this is how my memory works. This is why I do better having someone to talk to and hearing stories and things. And unfortunately, sometimes you start thinking about what you want to say before the other person ends because you just triggered something. It's fantastic. I mean, it's a good thing. So hopefully you'll come on here and do this again sometime. Anytime I'm going to do a show now, I'm just going to send a bunch of people the link, and you got an open invitation.
Well, thank
Uh,
you, Tim. I hope
yeah.
I didn't mean I probably didn't, what is it, hijack your live stream. But
No,
I
no,
wanted to talk
absolutely
to you about
not.
Joy Division this
No,
morning. So,
absolutely.
and I
No,
appreciate
no,
you
no.
inviting me.
Yeah. No, I came on this morning because of you guys juiced me up, got me going. I just
Mm.
was ready to do this. And I've been wanting to do book channels talking about Philip Jose Farmer for a while. I've dabbled in trying to do music on here. This works so much better. I do have a video where I talk about Neil Young and Devo's connection that actually does well. Every 3 or 4 months, it goes up in views and
Mm.
people seem to enjoy it. And you'll have one or two people that want to just tell you you're full of shit. Like, what do you do? You're just sort of like,
What do you
okay,
do?
you know.
What do you do?
But I'm gonna have to wind it up here. I just now remembered I'm supposed to be somewhere by noon, but they'll be all right. Um, I have 30 minutes to make a 45-minute drive. I'm not sweating it.
Don't get
So,
in trouble with your loved one, Tim.
oh no, no, no. This is nothing. This is nothing. I have a 3-day weekend. I'm on my schedule.
Okay.
And I'm going to throw out there. Well, hang out just for a minute if you can
After
after
the
we go
show,
off
yeah,
live.
I'll do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So everybody, I'm sorry to be abrupt and be the bad guy here. I completely forgot. I've had a good time.
It's good seeing everyone here in the
Yeah,
chats, the
no
ones I was able
problem.
to read.
And yeah, definitely check this. I'll be changing the title of this one because it went so much better than what I was trying to do. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and making this a great show. This is all in your court, so I appreciate that. So plug your channels, and we'll get out of here.
Bye, everybody. For me, it's just this channel here, and I have a book channel, Leave It Up Paradiso, and
Yep.
that's about it. So,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Be excellent to each other.
Adios.